The loudest hours in Rome are the hours between midnight and dawn. Freight moves in the dark because it is forbidden to move in the light. Iron-rimmed wheels come up the lane one axle at a time, and the sound arrives before the cart does, held between the walls. Under it there is a floor of other sound that never fully lifts. Dogs answering each other across the low ground, 2 streets apart, neither of them moving. A bakery fire drawing in its flue. A woman stands at the head of a stairwell with her palm flat on the wall. The plaster is colder than the air, and she holds her hand there while her eyes adjust and her breathing finds its slower shape. Her feet are awake before the rest of her, and she stands a moment longer than she needs to. She has not lit anything yet. Below her the dark smells of wet ash and of the water that was thrown down the shaft at the end of yesterday. Her name is Vibia. She carries water up to households on the high ground, where the aqueducts do not reach, and she is out 3 hours before the sky changes, because the streets belong to freight until then, and to her, while the freight is still moving. Rome kept no record of her. No census line, no tomb inscription, no ledger entry, nothing at all with her hand in it. What survives of her night is the shape of the city she moved through. Tonight she goes down first and comes up last. She will fill at a corner basin in her own quarter, and again lower down where the ground flattens toward the river, and she will spend the middle of the night walking through districts that have nothing to do with water. She has a reason for the river end of the walk. It is not a reason anyone would have written down either. She keeps it the way she keeps her count of the stairs. There are routes this city runs on that have never been mapped, not because it could not be done, but because the people who made maps were not thinking about them. The water route and the bread route and the wool route and the night laundry route, all running in the same dark as the carts and keeping the same hours. The carts carry goods in. These routes keep the goods moving once they arrive. She is 31 and has been on this round since she was 26. Before that, she was on a different round in a different quarter, shorter and lower, with no climb in it and no delivery at the top. She did not choose the water round. She came to it the way everything comes to her, by what was available and who was leaving and what the timing happened to be. She knows the route. She does not have a word for what knowing it this way is. Tonight is an ordinary night. No feast day, no market day, no day that anyone in the building above her would think to mark. The shop below will open at first light, and the man at the vat will do what he does, and the woman with the tray will take it to her corner. Vibia will be asleep before any of them have unlocked anything. She will sleep the way a person sleeps who walked the city all night and has nothing left to hold her up. The key on the cord round her neck is cold against her breastbone, cold from the night air that has been in the room all night with the shutter cracked. In summer, it is the coldest thing in the room. In winter, it is the thing she puts her hand over when everything else is past enduring. She has had it 2 years, and it is not the first key to that door and will not be the last. There will be someone after her with a different key and the same cold landing. She wants to own the jar she carries. That is the whole of the want. A jar of this size costs what she clears in under 2 months if nothing goes wrong, and the nothing going wrong is the difficult part. She has got to the middle of that stretch twice, and both times something went wrong in the middle. Not catastrophically, just enough to start the count again. Everything else tonight is the walk. The lamp is still cold in her hand. The district she lives in is called the Subura, and it sits in the low ground between 2 hills, which means the air in it does not move much, and the water in it has nowhere to go. Everything drains toward here. In the wet months, the ground floors take it first. The rooms are stacked 5 and 6 deep above the shops, and the higher you live, the less you pay, and the colder it is at this hour. Wheeled traffic is not allowed to move inside the city during the daylight hours. The rule is set out on a bronze tablet found at Heraclea in the flat language of a statute. No cart, no wagon, no dray from the first hour of the day until the 10th, excepting the ones hauling material for the temples and the ones hauling rubble out of them. So the drays stand outside the gates all day with their axles greased, and they come in when the light goes. That is what the sound is. It is not a crowd. There is no crowd at this hour, and there is nothing to show one by. Nothing is lit in Rome after dark except what somebody is carrying. A lamp in a hand, a fire behind a door left open for the draft, the sky where the lane is wide enough to admit it. The street fills with freight and empties again, and in the gaps between carts you can hear a man 2 floors up clear his throat. The water does not stop either. It comes in by gravity down channels cut to fall a little in every 100 feet, and it runs whether anyone is drawing from it or not, because there is no practical way to hold it back. It arrives at street basins that overflow all night into the gutters and take the filth down with them. The man who ran the water counted 591 public basins. He wrote the number down because water was being stolen from every one of them. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. Vibia is not the only person walking. The breadwomen are at the ovens already with their trays balanced. The wool washers are pulling yesterday's cloth off the roof frames while it is still stiff with cold. Somebody is up on the slope above the gardens cutting herbs by feel to be down at the market before the stalls are laid out. They start in the dark because the streets are usable in the dark. That is the whole of the reason. The city at this hour belongs to the people who make it work rather than to the people who say they run it. Nobody has written that down either, not because it is not true, but because the people who write things down are asleep, and the people who know it are the ones in the lanes with loads on their backs, and they have not been asked and would not put it that way if they were. The buildings above the shop fronts go up in layers, each floor projecting slightly further over the lane than the one below, so that the sky at the top of a narrow street is a strip, and in a wide street it opens into something that reads as sky. Augustus set the maximum height at 70 feet, and the rule is why the blocks stop where they stop. Above 70 feet the ground cannot be trusted to hold what is standing on it, and the city has tested that in both directions. The noise at this hour is the noise of stone carrying weight. The deep rumble of a loaded cart is not a sound in the air so much as a sound in the ground, and it travels further through the block than through the lane, and the people asleep on the upper floors feel it in their beds before they hear it. The people on the ground floor hear it and feel it at once. Vibia on the top floor is out before it reaches her. Vibia is a composite. Her name, her age, her round and her shoulder are assembled out of the water carriers who appear in other people's documents, in rental notices and legal complaints and the stamped lead of pipes, never once in their own words. 31 years old. A band of hard skin across the left shoulder where the jar rides. She is as real as the evidence allows, and no more than that. The stairwell she is standing in has no window. It turns twice on itself before it reaches the courtyard, and the treads are wood, and everyone in the building knows which of them to trust and which to put a foot near the wall on. She works her thumb into the lamp's fill hole to feel the level of the oil. She does not need light for the stairs. She needs it for the lane so that whatever is coming up, it can see her. What is coming up the lane is the city doing what it does all night, which is supply itself. The water that comes in at the high ground basins does not get to the top floors by gravity. It gets there one jar at a time, upstairs learned in the feet. Chapter 1. The room above the stairwell. Before the stairwell there is the room, and the room is the last one on the last floor, where the boards give a little under a foot, and the roof is close enough over the bed that you learn not to sit up quickly. It is one room. It holds a bed, a chest, 2 hooks, a shelf with a lamp and a knife on it, and the jar in the corner standing upright in a ring of dried mud that marks where it has stood every night for 2 years. The bed is a sack of straw on a wooden frame, and there are 3 of them in it. Vibia, the woman she shares the rent with, and the woman's daughter, who sleeps between them because the middle of the bed is the warm part. The straw crunches when anyone turns. The child's heat comes through the blanket at the small of Vibia's back all night and is the reason she wakes slowly instead of all at once. No street-front building in Rome may stand higher than 70 feet. That was set as a rule, and the rule is why the top rooms exist at all. The block was built up to the limit and no further, and the last floor to be added is the cheapest to rent and the first to feel weather. There is no hearth up here and no flue. The heat in the room is whatever 3 bodies made overnight, and it is already leaving. The window is a hole with a shutter in it. There is no glass at this height and no expectation of any. When the shutter is open, the lane comes in. Wet stone, ash, the sour edge of the vat in the shop below. And when it is closed, the room smells of straw and of the oil in the lamp. She opens it a hand's width to see what the sky is doing. Cold comes over the sill like water finding a level. She dresses sitting on the edge of the frame. Tunic pulled down over her head in one movement, the belt found by feel and knotted at the left hip so the buckle does not sit where the jar will, then the pad, a strip of old cloth folded 4 times and set on the shoulder, and she settles it with 2 fingers and shifts it and settles it again. The pad matters more than the shoes. There is a poet who complained about a friend's lodging up 200 stairs and said he would not climb them for anything less than a funeral. 200 stairs is not an exaggeration in a city built to 70 feet. The count from this door to the courtyard is smaller than that, and it is still a count. Her knees know it going down better than her lungs know it coming up. Going down, the pain is in the front of the thigh. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. The lamp gets lit from an ember kept in a covered pot under the shelf, and the ember has to be found by breathing on it, and the pitch of the breath is the only sound in the room for a moment. The wick catches and stands up and settles. The light it gives is about as much as a candle gives, low and orange, and it does not reach the far wall. It reaches her hands and the 2 steps in front of her feet. The pot in the corner goes down the stairs and not out the window. Anything poured or thrown from a window makes the tenant liable for what it hits below, and the man whose head it lands on does not have to prove who threw it, only which window it came from. So the pot is carried, and the carrying is done by whoever is going down anyway, and tonight that is her in her left hand, held away from her leg. The building makes its noises in order. The shop below has its shutters barred and its vat covered and gives off nothing except smell. On the 3rd landing, a man coughs twice and stops. Somewhere below that, a hinge. The daughter turns over into the warm, hollow Vibia has left, and the other woman puts an arm across her without waking, and the straw settles under both of them, and then the room has nothing more to say. The door is closed with a wooden bar dropped into a socket from the inside, which means the woman inside bars it after her. The key on the cord around Vibia's neck is for the street door at the bottom, and it is cold against her breastbone, and it stays cold for the first part of the descent. She stands in the dark of the landing with the jar's rim resting against her collarbone and lets her eyes give up on the room. Her soles are leather worn down to the thickness of a coin, fastened with a thong across the instep, and they are shaped to her feet the way a saddle is shaped to a horse. They make almost nothing on stone. She can cross a courtyard at this hour without anyone above knowing it happened. The thong has to be retied twice a night. She does the first one now, standing, 1 foot braced on the frame. Then the stairs, wood for the first 2 turns, then brick and mortar where the block's older part begins, and the air changes at the join every time, cooler and flatter, so she knows where she is without looking. The jar rides empty and light and knocks the wall once at the turn. She stops to listen for whether the knock woke anything, and nothing answers, and she goes on down with her free hand out to the plaster. The door on the 2nd landing is never quite shut. Chapter 2. The Courtyard and the Shaft. The 2nd landing has a smell of its own, warmer than the stairs, and the warmth is coming through the gap where the door stands off its frame by the width of 2 fingers. There is light in there, low and steady, and it lays a stripe across the landing floor and up the opposite wall. Something inside the room moves and settles. Not a voice. A small dry sound, repeated, with pauses in it. You do not look in. Nobody in the building looks in. The gap has been there long enough that the plaster beside it has a rubbed place where hands have gone past and a stripe of soot above it where the heat runs up the wall. Vibia passes with the pot held out and her shoulder turned, and the light crosses her feet and is behind her, and the small sound continues without noticing her at all. The stairs finish in a passage with a barred door at the far end and a courtyard on the left, open to the sky, 3 walls of windows looking down into it. This is where the block breathes. In summer, it is the only cool place in the building and people sit in it at midnight. Tonight it holds air that has not moved since dusk, and standing in it is colder than standing in the lane will be. There is a shaft in the corner of the courtyard, plastered, going down past the ground floor into a pit under the block. Everything the building cannot use goes into that pit. The pot goes over the lip and is tipped and rinsed with a dipper of water from the tub kept beside it for that purpose. The sound the shaft makes is a long, soft one that finishes lower than it began. She does not hurry the rinsing. Under a block at Herculaneum, the sewer was found still full. It had never been cleared. What was in it was the whole life of the rooms above, laid down in order: fish bones and shell, olive stones, the twisted off necks of jars, a comb, threads, seeds, 60 different plants, the sweepings of kitchens and the contents of upstairs pots, and one coin somebody must have gone looking for. Nothing in it was written. All of it was theirs. The tub of rinsing water is filled from the basin at the corner by whoever needs it, which in practice means by her 4 times out of 5, because she is the one who goes past the basin anyway, and because a full tub is a reason nobody argues with her about the shaft. She lifts the lid and looks at the level and lets the lid down without letting it drop. It has a chip out of it shaped like a thumbnail. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. By the barred door, there is a stretch of wall that has been whitewashed and painted on, and the paint is a notice, and the notice is a landlord's. In the block of Ariana Poliana, the property of Nigidius Maius, to let from the Ides of July, shops with their upper rooms, apartments for gentlemen, and the house. The letters stand 2 hands high in red where the words matter. Under them, smaller, somebody has added the name of the agent to see. The whitewash goes to shoulder height and stops. Below shoulder height, the wall is bare and marked with the constant traffic of the passage, a long dark polish at hip level from bodies going through with loads, and a lower band of splash from the gutter that runs across the entry when it rains. Vibia sets the pot inside the alcove at the foot of the stairs, where whoever comes down next will see it and take it up. The alcove is where a doorkeeper would sleep in a better block. In this one, it holds 2 brooms, a broken stool, a stack of tiles nobody has taken away, and the smell of the man who does sleep there in the wet months when his own room floods. He is not there tonight. The stool has been moved since yesterday and set square against the wall, which is how she knows he has been down and gone up again, and that the tiles are still nobody's. She lifts the jar off her hip and onto the shoulder, and this is the part of the night her body objects to, not the carrying, the getting it up. Empty, it weighs what a full basket of tiles weighs. The pad takes it. She rolls her shoulder once under the rim to seat it, and her free hand comes up automatically to the neck of the jar, 2 fingers hooked over, and stays there for the rest of the walk. The bar on the street door lifts out of its brackets and is set on end in the corner where it lives, worn pale at the middle. Beyond the door, the lane is running with sound. She does not put her hand to the key at her neck until she is outside and the door is shut behind her. The stone under her soles is wet from nothing that fell tonight. It is wet from the basin which has been overflowing since before she was born. The lane goes 2 ways. Uphill, it narrows and turns and ends in stairs. She goes the other way, downhill, walking the crown because the edges are where everything collects. Cold comes off the gutter and off the wall at once. Ahead, there is a low glow thrown across the paving from something at knee height rather than from a window. The first warm place on her round is a counter set across a doorway. The cookshop counter. The first light in the lane below the block is not a lamp in a window. It is a doorway with a counter across it, and the counter is masonry, waist-high, faced in broken marble set in mortar, and it runs the whole width of the opening so that nobody goes in and everything is handed out. She comes down onto it out of the dark, and the warmth of it reaches her before the light does. Round holes are cut into the top of the counter, and jars are sunk into them to the shoulder. 5 of them, each with a wooden lid, each holding something different, and the mouths sit flush with the surface, so a ladle goes straight down and comes straight up. What is in them is dry goods and cooked goods both. The lids are lifted with 2 fingers under the rim and put back without a sound by a man who has done it 10,000 times. At the end of the counter, there is a small hearth built into the masonry with a grating over it and a bronze vessel standing on the grating, and the water in it has been kept just short of boiling all night. Wine is served hot here, cut with that water. A cup is filled from a jar. A ladle of the hot goes in, and the drinker holds the cup in both hands and does not sit down, because there is nowhere to sit. The men at the counter are cart drivers, and the drivers stand facing outward, watching their animals. 3 carts are stopped in the lane with the beasts' heads down and their loads still roped. A driver eats with his elbow on the marble and his back to the man who served him, and he finishes and puts the cup down and goes to the near wheel and puts his hand on the hub to feel whether it has been running hot. The wall behind the counter is written on, prices, in a hand that presses hard, in more than one hand, layered where old figures have been crossed and new ones put beside them. For 1 coin, you may drink wine. For 2, you drink the best. For 4, you drink Falernian. The last of those 3 is not in any of the sunken jars in this lane and has not been for years, and the line stays on the wall because nobody paints out a wall. There are chickpeas in one of the jars, cooked soft and salted, sold by the handful into a fold of cloth, lupins in another, and they are bitter unless they have been soaked for days, and the soaking is somebody's whole morning. A dish of something with fish in it that has been kept warm too long and smells of it. Bread from the same oven she will pass later, bought in the evening and going stale at its own pace. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. Vibia stops at the far end of the counter, where the marble is coldest, and does not buy anything. The man serving looks at her once and does not ask. She is not a customer at this hour, and both of them know what she is instead, somebody who will come back past here after the market with coin in her hand. The not asking is a kind of credit, and it has never once been described out loud between them. The heat off the hearth reaches about as far as her hip. She turns side onto it and lets it work on her leg. Her fingers come back one joint at a time. There is a smell of scorched wine where somebody has spilled onto the grating, and under that the wet cloth the counter gets wiped down with, and under that the animals. Her shoulder stays cold. Heat at this range does not get through a pad. One of the drivers is talking about the state of the road out through the gate, and nobody is answering him. He says it twice, differently the second time, and then stops. The animals shift. A cup goes down on marble. Somebody at the dark end of the counter laughs once at nothing anybody else heard, and it does not catch, and the lane goes back to the sound of the beasts breathing. A cookshop is where a household without a kitchen eats. In the upper rooms there is no hearth and no flue and no water, and cooking is done on a brazier if it is done at all, and the cost of the charcoal against the cost of a hot dish handed over a counter is an arithmetic that everybody in the block has done. She has eaten standing at this counter more nights than she has eaten sitting anywhere. The man puts a lid back on the chickpeas and takes a rag and goes along the marble with it once in a straight line, and the wet stripe he leaves goes matte and then dry from the ends inward. He does not look up while he does it. He trims the wick with his thumbnail and the flame stands up and steadies. She takes her hand off the marble and the warmth goes out of it in about the time it takes to reach the end of the lane. Behind her, a lid comes off and goes back on. The gutter runs harder on this side than it did on the way down, which means somebody upslope has drawn and spilled, and the sound ahead of her gathers and thickens until it stops resembling any one thing. The corner she is walking to is the loudest place in the quarter, and it is loud because of water. Chapter 3. The Basin at the Corner. The basin sits where 3 streets meet, a trough of stone set on a low plinth with a pillar at one end, and the water comes out of the pillar through a spout of bronze and does not stop. It has not stopped in living memory. The overflow goes over the front lip at the worn place and lands and spreads and runs off downhill, and the stone all round the plinth is dark and slick and slightly warmer than the air. Standing beside it, you stop hearing anything else clearly. The fall of the spout into the trough, the second fall of the overflow onto the paving, the trickle in the gutter going away, 3 sounds at 3 pitches, and they cover the carts, and people at this corner talk closer to each other's faces than they do anywhere else in the quarter. The air here is wet enough to feel on the mouth. There are 4 of them waiting when Vibia arrives, and none of them are talking. A man with a yoke and 2 buckets, standing with the yoke already on his shoulders. A boy with a jug too big for him, sent down for a household that is awake and wants water now. 2 women she knows by their walk before she sees their faces, and one of them lifts her chin at Vibia, and that is the whole of the greeting. The water in the trough is Marcia. It comes down from the hill country and it comes in cold, and it is held to be the best water in the city for drinking, and people who can choose will send a slave past 2 nearer basins to fill from this one. The coldness is the thing you notice with your hands, and it is also the reason for the reputation. In the hot months, the same trough is worth standing next to. The queue moves by the length of time each vessel takes. She sets the jar in on the sill with the mouth under the spout, one hand on the shoulder of it, and listens. Filling is done by ear. The pitch rises as the air goes out of it, and near the end it climbs quickly, and she pulls it back when the sound tells her it is 3 fingers short of the neck, because a jar filled to the neck slops down her back, and a jar 3 fingers short does not. Full, the jar takes what 2 buckets take. The weight arrives on the shoulder as a single thing and then distributes down the spine and into the hips, and the first 10 paces are always a negotiation. Her left hand comes over to the rim, her right arm goes out for the counterweight, and her chin comes up. Anyone who has done it can tell from behind whether a carrier is loaded or empty by the angle of the neck. The spout itself is not free to be changed. The nozzle is a bronze fitting of fixed bore, stamped, and it is set into the pipe by the water office and sealed there. A wider one takes more water for the same grant. The rule against tampering exists because the tampering is constant, a nozzle taken out and put back a size larger, a pipe tapped on the quiet side of a wall, a bath somewhere upslope running all day on a right that was granted for a garden. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. Behind the plinth, the pipe comes out of the ground for a hand's length before it goes into the stone, and the pipe is lead, and lead takes an impression and keeps it. There is lettering raised along the top of it, cast in when the sheet was rolled, and the letters are worn where feet have gone over them and clear where the plinth has kept them covered. She has known that pipe as long as she has known the corner. You can feel the difference between a full jar and an empty one in your teeth. Loaded, every step comes up through the leg and the shoulder and arrives at the jaw, and a carrier walks with the mouth slightly open for that reason, and the cold air comes in on the back of the throat and stays there. In the wet months, this is how a carrier's chest goes. In the dry months, it is the shoulder instead. The man with the yoke goes uphill, and his bucket set up a swing that he corrects at every 4th pace, and the sound of him gets further away in a rhythm rather than a line. The boy with the jug has both arms round it and is going slowly and will be a long time. Nobody offers to help him and nobody stops him. His household will hear him coming from the bottom of the stairs and open the door before he reaches it. Vibia's first load does not go uphill. It goes to the fullery in the low ground because the fullery buys clean water by the jar in the dark hours and pays at the end of the week, and because the way down is the way she was going. The second load will be the one that climbs. She turns out of the noise of the corner, and the noise stops behind her almost at once, as though a door had shut on it. Downhill, the paving is dry again within 30 paces, and the sound of her soles comes back to her. The lane bends left, and where it bends there is a low wall at the height of a shoulder, and she is going to set the jar down on it for a moment because that bend is the last flat place before the ground begins to fall in earnest. The cold has got into her sleeve where the wet rim leaned. The letters on that pipe are a name. The dyer's doorway. Below the basin, the lane runs on, and the third door along stands open on a room with a fire in it, and the fire is under the floor rather than in it. The vats are lead, set into masonry benches, with a flue running beneath them. 2 of them are working. The steam comes off the surface in a slow sheet and goes out through the doorway at head height, and walking into it is like walking into breath. The heat in that room is not the dry heat of an oven. It is wet, and it settles on the skin and stays, and the walls run with it, and the plaster above the benches has been eaten away in patches to the brick. A man stands between the 2 vats with a pole in each hand, and he turns the cloth in one and then the other, over and under, never letting a fold stay on the surface long enough to dry. The smell has 3 layers, and they do not mix. Wet wool underneath. Something sour and vegetable above it, from the vat that has been standing and working since yesterday. And over both of those, sharp and mineral, the smell of the fixing salt. She breathes through her mouth for the length of the doorway, and it makes no difference at all. The room has a taste as well, and the taste arrives a moment after the smell and sits at the back of the tongue. Without alum, the colour goes into the wool and comes back out again in the first wash. It arrives in the city in lumps, dug and shipped, and it is weighed out small and dissolved, and the cloth is steeped in it before it ever goes near a colour. The steeping is the part nobody sees in the finished cloth. It is also the part that is paid for twice because the salt costs and the extra day costs. The reds come from a root. It is grown in beds outside the walls, lifted, dried, broken up, and it goes into the vat as a coarse grit that sinks and has to be kept moving off the bottom with the pole. The colour it gives depends on the water and on the heat and on how long, and no 2 lots of the same root give the same cloth, and every dyer in the lane will tell you his water is the reason his is better. The man tests the vat with the back of his hand held a hand's width above the surface and then goes to the flue mouth at the end of the bench and takes a stick out and puts a different one in. His forearms are marked with old shiny burns in a band where the rim of the vat comes. He does not roll his sleeves because there are no sleeves. The work is done stripped to the waist in a room that is wet all year. There are two trades here and each has its own name: the men who colour new cloth and the men who colour cloth that has already been worn. The second is the larger of them. A tunic that has gone thin and grey at the shoulders comes back out of a vat, dark and even, and it is the same tunic, and it will be sold on as what it is by somebody who does not lie about it and does not volunteer it either. You can tell the redyers work in the street by the way it holds the light. New cloth takes the colour into the fibre, old cloth takes it onto the surface, and the surface goes shiny where the elbow bends. Vibia's own tunic came out of a vat in this lane 2 winters ago and was brown before it was this colour, and the shoulder where the pad rides has gone back toward brown again. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. At the back of the room, past the vats, there are frames with cloth hung over them at head height, dripping onto the floor, and the floor is laid to fall toward a channel that goes out under the wall to the gutter. The dyeing is done at night because the drying is done in the shade. Colour set in full sun goes uneven and comes out of the frame patchy along the fold lines, and a patchy length is sold as a second. A boy is on the floor with a wooden scoop pushing the runoff along the channel toward the outlet, and the runoff is the colour of the vat above it, and the channel is stained to a depth of years in bands. He works from the far end toward the door and does not look up when her feet come into the light. His knees are wet through. He will be on that floor until the last frame is hung. The lane outside is colder for having stood in that room. The steam goes with her for a few paces on the cloth of her tunic and then lifts off it, and she is left damp rather than warm. Behind her, a pole knocks the rim of a vat twice and is set down against the bench. Ahead, the ground begins to go down in earnest, and the paving changes underfoot from set blocks to something older and less even, laid before anybody thought about how a wheel would take it. She takes the first of the fall, short-stepped with her free hand loose at her side. The gutter beside her runs faster than she walks. Somewhere below, out of sight, iron rims are coming up toward her at the pace of a slow animal. She hears the sound arrive at a corner and turn, and she puts herself against the wall well before it reaches her, because a loaded cart on a fall does not stop for anybody. The descent runs 4 blocks without once levelling. Chapter 4: The Long Descent. The street that takes her down runs between workshops with their fronts shuttered, and it falls steadily for the length of 4 blocks without once levelling, and the fall is the reason it is paved the way it is. The stones are polygonal blocks of lava cut to fit each other and to fit nothing else. They are laid tight enough that a coin will not go between them and set with the middle of the road standing higher than the sides. Going down a gradient with a load on one shoulder is not walking. The front of the thigh takes it and the knee is held slightly bent the whole way, so the weight never drops onto the joint straight and the foot lands flat rather than heel first. Her right arm is out for balance and her left hand is hooked in the jar's mouth. She goes at a pace that would look slow to anyone watching and is not slow. The blocks are worn into 2 ruts that run the length of the descent, one on each side of the crown, and the ruts are the depth of a finger joint in places and polished at the bottom. Iron rims made them, going down loaded and coming up empty, for longer than the shops have been here. Rainwater lives in them. Her soles go on the unworn stone between them, and you would find the same line without deciding to. A satire in circulation says that only the very rich sleep in Rome, in a house set back from the street with a garden between them and the wheels. She has passed such a door on this descent every night for 2 years. It is set into a plain wall with no windows on the street, and behind the wall there is space, and the space is the whole of the argument. At this hour the door is the quietest thing in the road. Where the descent crosses another street, there are 3 flat slabs raised above the paving, set in a line from curb to curb so that a person can cross without going into the water and the filth that runs down the sides. The gaps between them are wide enough to admit a wheel and no wider. Every cart in the city has to have an axle that will pass those gaps, which means the gaps are the measure and the carts are cut to it. She goes over the slabs with the jar, and she takes them in 3 steps and does not look down. The top of each slab is dished slightly in the middle from feet. In the wet, the stone is greased with whatever came down the hill, and a carrier who slips on a crossing slab loses the jar first and then the week, so the crossing is done with the whole attention and nothing said to anybody standing on it. At the corner beyond the crossing there is a shrine built into the angle of the wall, a small niche with a painted pair of figures in it, both dancing, both holding a drinking horn out at arm's length. The crossroads gods belong to the street and not to any house on it. There is a garland on the ledge that has gone brown and a fresher one crossed over it, and a smear of oil, and the ash of something small that was burned there in the evening. The people who keep that niche are the people of the 4 streets that meet at it in turn by arrangement, and it is the one thing in the quarter that everybody has a share in. The niche has a lip that keeps the rain off the paint. A cat is sitting on the lip and does not move as she comes past, and the smell at that corner is oil and old flowers over the smell of the gutter, which does not go away. Below the crossing the workshops give out, and the street narrows, and the buildings on the left stand higher, so that the sky closes to a strip. The temperature drops in that stretch the way it drops in a cellar. She feels it on the wet patch on her shoulder first. 10 paces of it, then the strip widens again, and warmth comes back that is not warmth so much as the absence of that particular cold. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. There is a doorway on the right with 2 worn steps up to it, and on the lower step, set against the riser where a foot will not find it, there is a bundle of green stalks tied round twice with a strip of rush. The cut ends are wet. She has stepped over it before. Tonight she notices it because the bundle is bigger than it was and because the rush is knotted the same way both nights. The last part of the descent is the steepest, and she takes it with her free hand touching the wall, and the wall is brick and warmer than the lava. Somewhere down there a mule is being backed into a space it does not want to go into, and the sound of that is a man's voice and hooves changing their mind twice, and then the scrape of a hub against stone, and then nothing at all from that direction. At the bottom, the ground flattens and the smell changes completely, and she stops on the flat with the jar still up and lets her breathing catch her. Her shoulder has gone numb in the band. At the bottom, the lane opens and the smell changes. Something from the east is hot and earthy and comes from a fire that has been doing the same thing all night. There is a lamp at the far end of it that she has never seen out. The lampmaker's shutter. The lamp is in a shutter, half open, on a room where 3 people are working, and not one of them is looking at the door. It is a wide shutter, folded back against the wall, and a single oil lamp on a spike inside throws light out at an angle that puts it on the paving before it reaches you. The paving in that patch is terracotta coloured rather than black, and the colour stops as sharp as a line. The trade inside is lamp making, and lamps are made at night because the moulds are read by feel. A man is at a table with a mould in 2 halves, and his thumbs are pressing the 2 halves together along the join, and the pressure is even and sustained, and he does not check it with his eyes. Beside him, a woman is trimming the dried seams off finished pieces with a small knife. Fast, without looking at that either. The third person, a young man, is stacking. The moulds are terracotta themselves, and the lamp comes out of them as raw clay in the shape of the finished thing, saucer and nozzle and handle, and the relief pattern on the lid already pressed in. The clay has to be leather hard before it can be trimmed and not quite dry before it can be fired, and the timing of that is done by touch and by the sound the knife makes on the surface. Too wet and the blade drags, too dry and it chips. The most common lamp in the city is a shallow dish with a nozzle for a wick and a hole in the top to fill through. What is in this room are variations on that shape, some with a longer nozzle, some with 2 nozzles side by side, some with a handle that curves back over the body, and some with a plain tab. The pattern on the lid is a vine on most of them, and on one shelf there are lamps with figures on them pressed sharper. The oil the lamps burn is not the oil in the eating. Lamp oil is the last press, the third pressing, when the paste has already given up its good, and it is thin and slightly rancid and burns with a small flame and a thin smoke and a smell that is not unpleasant at 1 lamp's distance and is considerable at 40. Vibia's room has 2 hooks on the wall and 1 lamp, and it is moved between the hooks depending on who needs the light for what. The woman trimming seams sets a finished piece on the shelf without turning round and reaches into the basket at her feet for the next one, and the reaching and the returning are one movement. Her knife goes round the nozzle, join in a single pass, and starts on the fill hole. A thin clay snake falls off the edge of the table and dries on the floor with the others. The floor under the table is white with clay dust to the depth of a handspan. The young man stacking is counting. He does it under his breath at a pace that matches the stacking, one number per piece, and the stack has a cross piece between every fifth layer to keep the weight from crushing the bottom ones. A kiln load requires 400 pieces to be worth firing. The counting goes on behind every other sound in the room and does not stop when she passes the opening. Vibia does not stop either. She passes the shutter at the pace she came down the hill, and the lamp's heat reaches her face for 2 steps, and then the lamp is behind her, and the cold comes back. The smell of raw clay goes on longer than the warmth. It is the smell of the ground under the street. The lane ahead runs into a wider way where 2 streets join, and the joined street has a smell of its own that arrives before the street does. Leather and tanning and the salt that goes into it are 3 smells that travel further than almost anything else. They spread at eye level and have a weight to them. She has never decided whether it clears her head or forces everything else out. The workshop on the corner has its door shut but not barred, and through the crack the sound of iron on iron comes out steadily, not at work speed, more like a man keeping his hands occupied while he waits for something or finishes something small before the morning. A lamp inside turns the crack into a line of orange at knee height. She goes past it on the far side of the lane. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. The smell of the tanning goes with her for the next block, settling into the cloth of her tunic from both sides. And then she turns, and it is behind her, and the air ahead of her is cold and carries nothing but the sound of the carts on the next wide road. The shoemaker's street opens on her left, and the smell in it is the near cousin of what she just walked through, worked and cut rather than raw. The lamp at the end of that street is the one she has been heading for. The light it gives is from a bracket, not carried, which means it belongs to the building rather than to a person inside it, and the bracket is iron and set at shoulder height in the doorpost, and the flame in the lamp is turned down low enough to last till morning without being filled. It has been giving exactly that much light for as long as she has been doing this round. It will be giving it when she comes back past in an hour. Chapter 5. The Street of Shoemakers. The street is called after what is made in it, and what is made in it is footwear. Nobody gives it directions by any other name. The smell arrives before the street does, and it is 2 smells laid over each other, the sharp one of the tanning, which comes from further off and never entirely clears, and the closer one of cut leather, which is oily and slightly sweet and settles at the back of the nose. Half the fronts are open, not open for custom, open because the work needs the doorway. A bench is set square in the entrance with the lamp behind it on a bracket so the light falls forward onto the hands, and the man behind the bench is working at the edge of the light with his knees apart and a strip of hide over one thigh. He does not look up as she passes. His hands do not stop for her either. The sound of the street is hammering, and the hammering is not fast. 2 blows, a pause the length of a breath, 2 more. The nails going into a sole go in one at a time, and each one is set with the fingers first. A pair of soles takes better than 100 iron studs. They go in patterns, a circle, or a row, round the edge with a cross inside it, and the pattern belongs to the maker and serves as his mark. You hear studded soles before you see them. A man in hobnails coming down this street is louder than a mule, and the sound of him arrives off the walls as well as off the ground, and it changes when he crosses the crown, and it stops dead when he steps onto anything that is not stone. Vibia's own soles are smooth and take her past all of it without adding to it, and the men at the benches notice her only as a sound that did not arrive. The doorposts do the advertising. Where a shop has a trade worth naming, the jam is whitewashed and written on, and the writing goes at eye height and is renewed when it fades. There is a bookseller in the city whose doorpost carries the whole list of the poets he sells, priced, so a man can stand in the street and read the stock without going in. Here the posts carry shapes rather than words. A sandal outlined in red, a boot, a number. Above the benches the lasts hang on cords from the ceiling beam, dozens of them, wooden feet in every size blackened with use, and they turn slightly in the draught from the door. Each one was cut for a person. The ones that belong to somebody who orders regularly have a scratched mark on the ankle. A last outlives the foot it was cut for and serves afterwards for anybody near enough that size. Halfway along, a man is standing in a doorway with a flat basket of cut pieces, and women are coming to him out of the dark and going away with bundles. The pieces are uppers, cut and punched and not yet joined. The stitching is done at home, at night, by the piece, and paid by the piece. He counts what he hands over and cuts a tally into a strip of wood, and the woman counts it too, and no number is said out loud. One of the bundles is tied round twice with a strip of rush, and the knot is the knot Vibia knows off the second landing, and that is all there is to the light under that door. A woman sitting up with a lamp and a needle and a bundle of uppers, working while the child sleeps, stopping when the oil is low. The small dry sound is an awl going through wet leather. The door stands open 2 fingers for the heat to go out. The cold in this street is different because of the doorways. Every open front puts out a little warmth and a smell of scorched thread, and between fronts the air goes back to the temperature of the stone, so walking down it is a sequence: warm, cold, at the interval of the shops. She feels it on the wet side of her neck. The jar has been up long enough now to have stopped being a weight and started being a shape. At the far end, a woman is putting a whole day's finished work into a crate, sole against sole, and packing straw between the layers with her thumbs. She works fast, and she works without looking, and her forearms are marked all over with small old cuts that have healed white. When the crate is full, she leans on the lid to get the pegs in, then straightens and puts her hands into the small of her back and stands there. Vibia stops at the last doorway on the left, where the light is, and sets the jar down on the step to shift the pad. The man inside is soaking a strip of hide in a bowl to make it take a bend, and the water in the bowl has gone the colour of weak wine, and he wrings the strip out over the bowl and starts again. He nods at her without stopping. She has known his hands for 2 years, and never his name. Beyond the shoemakers, the street opens into a wider way that runs east and west, and that way is where the freight goes, and the freight is already moving on it. She can feel it through the step before she hears it. She gets the jar up again, and the numbness returns. The wide street is one she has to cross rather than walk. The Bath Furnace Yard. Past the shoemaker's street and before the freight crossing there is a yard whose wall gives off heat at ground level, and the heat comes out of a vent in the base of the wall that is a hand's width across, and the air coming out of it is hot and dry and smells of brick that has been hot for a long time. She knows this vent. She has held her hands over it in the worst weeks of January, 2 seconds at a time, going and coming back. The public bath on the far side of this wall is heated from below. A furnace room runs under the bathing floors, and the furnace in it has been fed since the afternoon and will be fed until the water is done, and the stoker will have worked through the night rather than let the fires drop, because a fire that drops in a furnace room is a morning of relighting and a lost day of trade. The smoke of it comes out at roof height, pale grey, caught by the lamplight at the corners. The bath floor stands on pillars the height of a forearm, and under the floor the hot air moves through the pillar forest and goes into the walls through channels, and the walls carry it up to the domed ceiling, and the ceiling holds it. The bathers walk on a floor that is warm through the feet and breathe air that has been circulating since the fire was lit. The system is continuous, and it is invisible, and when it works, nobody speaks of it. The man who stokes the furnace will have used 4 cartloads of wood by the first hour of the morning. He is on the other side of this wall right now, close enough to hear if she knocked on the stone, sitting in a room that is hotter than any room in the city, except the room next to it. His job is to keep the fire at the same temperature for 12 hours without letting it climb or fall, and he knows it the way she knows a full jar by the pitch of it. She holds her hands over the vent for the 2 seconds and takes them away, and the warmth goes with them in another 2 seconds and does not leave anything behind. The lane past the vent is cold again before she is 10 paces from it. The cold does not feel personal. It is a condition of the ground and the hour and the wall beside her that happens to have no fire behind it, and that is all it is. The bath charges an admission fee, and the fee is low enough that it is paid. Women and men use the bath at different hours. The women's hours are the morning ones, after the furnace has been running all night and before the men's hours begin, and the water is warmest at the very beginning before anyone is in it, and the women who work long hours tend to go at the end of the women's time rather than the beginning. Vibia went twice last month, on the days that fell right for the round. The bath has a cold room and a warm room and a hot room and a pool, and what it also has is a room where a woman can sit without anything being required of her for the length of time it takes the sweat to dry. She went to that room both times, and on both visits stayed in it longer than she went for. The other women in it were not talking either. The bath's water comes from a grant off the aqueduct, and the grant is measured. The water that comes in goes out again through the drains, heated and used, and the drain runs under this lane to join the system below, and she walks over it every night without giving it a thought. The hot water going out is hotter than the air in the lane, and where the drain is directly below her feet, the paving is marginally warmer than the paving a step away. She could tell you where that warm patch starts and ends. It is 4 paces wide and slightly warm in the centre and barely warm at the edges, and in January, the warm patch is the most specific thing on this stretch of the lane. In summer, it is indistinguishable from the ambient warmth of the stone, and she is not thinking about it. Seasons change what she notices. The road is not the same road in August as it is now. The freight crossing is at the end of this lane, and she can hear it before she reaches it. The specific sound of iron rims on lava blocks at close range, which is a sound that arrives as percussion rather than as a rumble, and has a pace to it that is the pace of the animals and not of the drivers. She comes to the end of the lane, and the sound and the smell of the animals hit her at the same time, and both of them are large. She waits at the curb with the jar up and her eyes reading the traffic for its pattern. A good gap is the length it takes to cross at full pace plus 4 steps to spare. A bad gap is the one that closes while you are in it. The freight street does not pause for her, and she does not expect it to. The gap, when it comes, is the length of a held breath, and she takes it with her eyes on the far curb and her chin up. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The lane before the bakery. The 30 paces of blank wall at the end of the watchhouse lane are the coldest 30 paces she walks tonight. Nothing feeds the air there, no doorway, no vent, no body standing in an opening, and the cold in it has come down from the hill and found nowhere further to go. Her breath makes itself visible for those 30 paces and nowhere else. She counts them the way she counts the stairs in the dark, by feel, with her shoulder touching nothing. The smell changes at exactly the 28th pace, because the 28th pace is where the first crack appears in the wall on her right, and through the crack comes warmth and flour and the damp wooden smell of a trough that has had wet dough in it for years. The bakery wall is warm to the touch for the last 2 paces before the door. She puts her palm on it as she passes, and the warmth goes into her hand and stays there past the corner. The door is open on a room that is larger than the shoemaker's fronts and lit from the oven mouth as much as from the lamps, and the oven mouth is where everything in the room refers. 3 men are standing in front of it in a line, and the peels are going in and coming out in a rotation timed over enough years that nobody announces the next move. The smoke goes up and out through a gap in the roof left for it. You would know the moment you stepped in, the heat that has been running all night, and the flour that never fully settles. She sets the jar down at the side of the door, and her shoulder goes from weight to nothing in a single step. The nothing is always worse than the weight at first. Her arm comes up by itself to where the rim was and stays there at an angle it has learned, and she lets it. She puts the arm down deliberately, and it comes back up, and she lets it stay at the angle the muscle has learned. Not wrong, just without a jar in it. The arm that carries a jar all night does not stop carrying when the jar is gone. That is a thing she knows without thinking about it, and she is not thinking about it now. She is thinking about the heat on the side of her face and the smell of the bread. Inside, a woman is at a table set against the wall with a tray of finished rolls in front of her and a knife, and she scores each one twice across the top before it goes onto the peel. The scoring lets the steam out and keeps the top from splitting. The knife is short and thick-bladed, and the handle has been worn to the shape of her grip, and every roll that comes off the table has the same 2 marks in the same place. Bread is sold by weight, and the weights are checked. A man from the Ayadils comes to the market stalls with a set of standard weights and a scale, and he checks what the bakers are selling against what they are claiming, and a short loaf is a fine, and more than a short loaf is a second fine. The weights for this bakery are hanging on a peg by the door. The peg has a dark ring round it from the cord. The stone of the doorstep has a shallow dish worn into it on both sides from the mill donkey's circuit, because the mill room opens directly into the doorway, and the donkey has been going round long enough to tell the stone about it. She puts her foot in the dish on the right-hand side and leans her hip against the post and closes her eyes for a moment. The stone under her foot is warm from the oven behind it and from the nights before that. Closing her eyes in a warm doorway after midnight is a thing she does without risk because her feet stay awake when the rest of her does not. She has closed her eyes in this doorway many times and has never gone all the way down. What she gets instead is a quietening, a narrowing of what the ears attend to, so that the loudest things become the breathing of the donkey and the scrape of the knife. The oven mouth goes dark when the door is swung up on its chain, and the room goes 2 shades dimmer, and the 3 men at the peels wait for the count, and then the door comes back down. The woman at the scoring table does not look up for the dark and does not slow for the light. Her knife goes at the same pace in both. She will have scored 3,000 rolls before she goes home. The 4th batch is out and stacked. Behind the oven there is a yard with a gate in the far wall, and through that gate a lane runs toward the fullery without going back through the freight street. She has been taking it for a year and a half. It is not short and not well paved, and it goes past a yard whose smell she has never tried to identify, and it leads to the fullery gate without crossing a cart road. Chapter 6. The Lane the Carts Take. The wide street is a river with a current in it. Everything on it is going one way for as long as it takes to pass, and then a gap opens and the next thing is coming the other way, and there is no order to it except the order the drivers make between themselves in the dark by shouting one word each. Vibia stands at the curb with the jar up and waits, and standing still is when the cold finds her. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. The nearest cart is an ox cart with 2 beasts in the yoke and a load of dressed stone on a low bed, and it is moving at the pace of the slowest animal, which is the pace of a person walking slowly. The wheels are solid, iron shod. The bed of a stone cart rides so low that the axle is a hand above the paving. She can smell the oxen from the curb, and the smell is warm and grassy and sits on top of the smell of the street. The driver walks at the head, not on the cart. He has a hand on the near beast's shoulder and a stick he is not using, and he talks to it steadily in a low voice with no words she can pick out, and the beast's ears turn back and forward again. Behind the stone are 2 more carts, mule-drawn, both loaded with something in baskets under wet cloth going in toward the middle of the city. The noise at this distance is not a rumble. It is separate. The rim strike, which is metal on stone at every irregularity, the axle, which is a slow, dry complaint, the hooves, and the driver, and under all of it, the load shifting against its own ropes. It arrives in the chest before it arrives in your ears. When a cart goes over the crown of the road, the sound doubles for 2 beats and then settles back. She crosses behind the second mule cart with 3 paces of open road, and the jar's weight makes the crossing a matter of commitment rather than speed. On the far curb she stops in the lee of a corner and lets a mason's dray go past. The dray is going out, not in empty, riding high, its bed dusted white, the driver asleep sitting up with the reins slack in his hands and the mule taking itself home. Down the lane on the far side there is a lit doorway with buckets outside it, stacked mouth down, and a stack of poles longer than a man leaning in the corner. The night watch keeps 7 cohorts in the city, 1 to every 2 of the 14 regions. They are the men who walk the streets at this hour looking upward, and the walking is most of the job, and what they carry is what the job actually consists of. The buckets are the obvious part, the rest is mats, heavy patchwork things quilted out of rags, thick as a mattress and stiff with use. Soaked in water or in vinegar, a mat laid over a fire will take the air away from it. 2 men can carry one folded. Against a doorway they can hold it up as a wall. 4 of them are piled against the jamb, dark and damp, putting the sour smell of vinegar into the lane. One of the watch is standing outside with his back to the wall and a pole across his knees, chewing something, and his eyes go along the roofline opposite and come back and go along it again. He is looking for a light that should not be lit. Vibia goes past close enough to be seen, and he registers her and returns to the roofline, and that is the transaction, and both of them are content with it. Inside the doorway, the wall by the lamp is scratched over with writing, layer on layer, all of it the same kind of writing. A man's name and the night he was on and the word for the tallow, because the lamps in the watch house are fed with fat and the fat is issued and somebody has to be answerable for it. Every night a man puts his name on that wall to say the lamps were seen to. The oldest of the scratches are only readable in the right light. The lane past the watch house drops again, gently, and the buildings on both sides are warehouses now rather than dwellings, with doors that are twice the height of a person and no windows at all below the 3rd course. There is nobody in it. The sound of the freight street closes off behind her within 20 paces, and what is left is her own souls, and far ahead, water going into a stone trough somewhere she cannot see. The air changes again at the bottom, thicker and wetter, with a sweetness in it that is not flowers. That is the low ground, where the water stands under the floors all year and the trades that need water have always been. She works the pad up a finger's width with her thumb. The cloth is wet through where the rim has leaned on it, and the wet has gone into the tunic and from the tunic into the skin. The lane past the watchhouse goes on for 30 more paces before the next doorway, and those 30 paces are the quietest stretch of the whole of the low ground. Both walls are blank. The gutter runs, but there is nothing feeding it, except what came off the roof when the air was wet hours ago. The cold in that stretch is complete. She knows what is at the end of it by the smell, long before she sees the light. The timber yard. The lane behind the bakery is lit by nothing except what comes over the yard wall, the red underside of the smoke above the oven, which puts a colour on the wall at roofline level and nothing lower. She walks it blind, which means by the feel of the paving and by the sound of her soles and by where the walls are. Blind in a lane has a particular sound, a doubled one, left and right, coming back at slightly different pitches depending on the width. Halfway along the lane, a yard opens on the right with no gate in it and no wall across the entrance, just a gap in the building line where a building came down and what replaced it was the yard. Timber is stored here, stacked on edge in rows between stakes, and the ends of the beams catch what light there is from the lane and hold it. The fresh-cut ones pale, the older ones dark, and the smell between them is sawdust and the sour smell of wood that has been rained on. The stacks go back further than the darkness allows you to see. The yard is bounded on 3 sides by the backs of other buildings, and the 4th side is the lane, and from inside it, the walls of those buildings are blank and high, and the timber fills the space between them to a depth she has not measured and does not need to. She carries water, not wood. Beside the entrance, 2 men are sleeping on a board raised off the ground between sawhorses, sharing a single covering that has slipped on the near side, and the near man has his arm out in the cold and his face turned toward the lane with his mouth open. A dog is lying under the board with its chin on the man's sandal. The dog lifts its head at her and does not bark because the dog has the sense it has. The city takes in 150 boatloads of timber every year according to the grain officials' count, and the count is probably low because not every load goes through the official landing. The wood comes down from the hills in rafts and is sold here by species as much as by size. Oak for the structural work, pine for the formwork, cypress for anything that will be near water. Fir for the cheap floors. The floor above her own head is fir. She has no way to see the species at this hour, and the stacks are sorted by size rather than by type anyway, and the sorting is for the buyer's convenience rather than the yard's. What she can tell by the smell is whether the wood is fresh or seasoned, and the back rows are seasoned and the front rows are fresh, and the smell of the fresh has the sap still working in it, rising through the grain even cut. Under the board, the dog has put its chin back down. The man's arm is still out in the cold and his face has turned further toward the lane, which means he is getting lighter, not deeper, and within an hour he will be awake and looking at the light in the yard and working out what the day requires. What the day requires is already stacked and waiting. The stakes hold the rows apart at an interval that lets air get through them. The timber yard smells are the smell she carries away from it, because smells travel in the cloth the way the flour does. She will smell of sawdust and cold pine and a little of the man's fire until the fullery's yard replaces it. The smells she moves through are a record of where she has been, in order: the shaft, the tanning, the dye, the flour, the leather, the resin. Nobody else can read it. At the end of the lane, the ground drops again, gently at first and then more, and the air that comes up from below the drop is warm and damp and sharp. The fullery puts its smell out into the lane before the lane puts out its lamplight. She has come this way enough times that the smell is the signal and not the door, and her body has already started the adjustment, mouth slightly open, eyes going easier, the part of the nose that fires first beginning to stand down. The warmth that comes up with the smell is not the dry warmth of a fire. It is the wet warmth of a room where something is always steaming, and the temperature difference between the lane and the fullery doorway is enough to feel on the skin. Her tunic, still slightly damp from the dyer's steam, picks it up first. Her neck picks it up second. Her feet are last because the feet are always last to know anything. She shifts the jar up a finger's width and takes the last of the slope on the crown where the wear is least. The gate in the Fullery's yard wall stands ajar at the same angle it always stands at, because the latch has been broken long enough for the hinges to remember. On the gate's far side, the treading sound is already there, even and slow, and it goes on without a break. The treaders have been in the vats long enough that their legs have stopped telling them so. Chapter 7. The Open Door of the Bakery. The heat reaches into the lane about the length of a cart before the door, and crossing into it is like stepping into water at the wrong temperature. Her face takes it first. The wet patch on her shoulder goes from cold to warm without drying. There is flour in the air in that space, fine enough to hang, and it settles on the sweat at her hairline and stays there, and she will find it later on the back of her hand. The front room is the mill room, and there are 3 mills in it, each one a pair of stones, standing waist high, the lower one a cone and the upper one shaped like 2 funnels, joined at the waist and dropped over it. The stones are cut from lava, because lava keeps its bite as it wears and does not polish smooth. A wooden frame is set through the upper stone, and a donkey is harnessed to the frame and walks in a circle it has walked all night. The donkey has its eyes covered. A cloth is bound round its head, so that it can see the ground under its nose and nothing else, and the walking is steadier for it, and the animal does not stop at the door, or at the boy, or at her. Its hooves have worn the floor into a trough on the circle. Flour comes out at the base of the stones into a channel, and a boy sweeps it inward with a board and does not straighten up between sweeps. The sound in the room is grinding, and it is the only sound in the room. It is not loud. It is continuous and low and slightly uneven, stone against stone with grain between them, and it comes up through the floor as much as through the air, so that standing in the doorway you feel it in the soles of your feet. Talking over it takes effort, so nobody talks. The boy communicates with the man at the trough by lifting the board. Behind the mills is the kneading, in a trough of stone with a wooden arm turning in it on a post, and 2 men pushing the arm round, leaning into it with their forearms and their whole weight, changing hands every few turns. The dough goes from a slack mass to something that pulls back. When it pulls back enough, they stop and cut it into lumps by eye, and the lumps go along a bench to be shaped by 4 pairs of hands. A baker in this city had his own tomb built in the shape of the work, with a frieze running round it showing every stage in order, the grain arriving, the mills turning, the sieving, the kneading in the trough, the shaping, the oven, the weighing out. He put the whole process on the outside of his grave where the road would see it. The men here have never seen it. They are doing the frieze from the inside. The oven mouth is low and arched, and the fire has been pushed to the sides, and the floor of it is swept with a wet rag on a pole between batches, and the steam from that goes up in one breath and is gone. The peels are longer than the room is wide and are handled at an angle. When the mouth is open, the light out of it makes the whole street orange for as long as it takes to load. Then the door goes back on and it is dark again. The loaves come out stamped with a name. A round stamp pressed into the top before baking, giving the man answerable for the bread, and on one such loaf the name is Celer, with the note that he belongs to Granius Verus, so the bread carries the slave and the owner both. Divided into 8 by a knife, the loaf breaks along the scores. Nobody in the room reads the stamp. The stamp is for whoever complains later. Vibia stands in the warm with the jar down on the step and her hands hanging, and she lets the heat get through to the shoulder properly for the first time since the corner. This is the part of the night that she counts as rest. It lasts as long as it takes the treaders at the Fullery to arrive, and she can tell how long that is by the batch, because the 4th batch and the treaders come together and always have. There is a man sitting on the far end of the step with his back against the jamb and his legs straight out into the lane. His hands are loose in his lap, palms up, which is what hands do after they have been holding something heavy for a long time. His shins are caked to the knee with grey mud, dried and cracking, and there is a piece of wood on a cord round his neck, cut square, with notches down one edge. He is not waiting for bread. He is not asleep either, and his eyes are open on the middle of the lane, and when a cart goes past the end of the street, he does not turn his head to it. The boy with the board goes round him and says nothing, which means he has been sat there long enough to have been asked once already. Vibia lowers herself onto the step with the jar between her knee and the jamb. The stone under her is warm all the way through. The 4th batch is not out yet. Chapter 8. The Fullery in the Low Ground. The smell of the fullery reaches further than the heat of the bakery did, and it works the other way on the body. It is sharp at the back of the throat, and it makes the eyes water at 30 paces, and then at 10 paces the eyes stop because the eyes give up quickly. It is ammonia and wet wool, and something underneath both of them that has soaked into the floor over years and belongs to the building now. At the street door, there are 2 jars sunk to the shoulder in the paving for passers-by to use. They are emptied inward. What goes into them is worth money to the trade because stale urine cuts grease out of wool the way nothing else available will, and a fullery that has to buy it buys it by the load from the blocks around. The jars are wiped round the rim every morning with a rag on the end of a stick, and the rag is rinsed in the gutter. The urine was taxed. A levy went on it, on the trade in it, and it was collected, and the collecting was not thought remarkable by anyone except the people who paid. The men inside have opinions about that which they express by not expressing them. What the tax means in practice is that a fuller counts what comes in at the door and does not leave the jars where a competitor's boy can get at them. The front of the shop is a row of low stalls, each one a tub set in a waist-high wall of masonry, and in each tub a man stands ankle-deep and treads. The treading is called the fuller's dance, and the walls are there to hold on to. They lean their forearms on the top course and work with their knees, shifting weight from foot to foot, and the cloth goes round under them, and the mixture comes up over the ankle at each turn. The treaders arrive together and undress together and step in without discussion, and the first minute is the worst minute, and after the first minute the legs stop reporting. You would know them in the street by their feet. The skin below the knee goes white and soft and cracks at the heel, and the smell does not come off them at the end of the shift or at the end of the year. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. Vibia's water goes into the rinsing tubs at the back, and it goes in from the shoulder, poured with the jar's neck in both hands and the base braced against the hip, and the pouring takes a while because a jar this size empties slowly through a narrow mouth. The rinsing water has to be clean and has to be fresh, and the fullery cannot draw it fast enough from its own basin at the hours when the treading is done. The man who keeps the tally is sitting on a stool with a wax tablet on his knee, and he cuts a stroke into the wax with the point of the stylus and turns the stylus over and rubs nothing out. 1 stroke, 1 jar. On the last day of the week, the strokes are counted and she is paid, and the counting is done twice, once by him and once by her in silence, and they have never yet disagreed. 3 jars a night, 4 when the fullery has a big order in, and out of that she keeps what is left after the man who owns the jar takes his share for the hire of it. A jar of this size, new, from a yard on the far side of the river, costs what she clears in something under 2 months if nothing goes wrong. Nothing going wrong for 2 months is the difficult part. She has got to the middle of that stretch twice. In the yard behind the tubs there are frames like tents, wicker, taller than a man, and a cloth is stretched over one of them, and a pot of coals is set underneath with sulphur on it. Sulphur smoke takes the yellow out of white wool. The cloth is left over it, and the smoke goes up through the weave, and the yard smells of struck flint on top of everything else, and the man who tends it stands upwind and turns his face away as he sets it down. After the sulphur comes the earth. A fine pale clay is worked into the damp wool with the hands and left in it, and it fills the cloth and takes the shine off, and it is brushed and beaten out on the frames afterward with a curved teasel head or a stiff brush. The clay comes into the city in lumps and is broken down in a mortar. The dust of it settles on everything in the room at hand height. She sets the empty jar down and rolls the shoulder backward twice, and the joint makes a sound she is used to, and the cold of the yard gets into the wet cloth of the pad at once. The lane out of the fullery runs toward the river, and she goes that way with the jar riding empty, and empty is not lighter in any way her back can name. Behind her, the treading goes on at the same tempo it will keep until light. She has an errand at the river end that has nothing to do with water. The fish sauce street, she comes out of the fullery yard by the side gate rather than the front, and the side gate puts her into a different lane, narrower, running east toward the river quarter. It is a lane she knows less well than the others, and she takes it carefully at first because the paving is less even and the gutter runs down the middle rather than the side. In the dark that matters. In the middle of the night on a lane she knows less well, she is slower. Fish sauce is made by pressing salted fish and collecting what drains out of the press. The process takes months, and it is done in vats sunk in the ground in yards, and the yards are closed, and the smell of them is not. It is the first thing this lane offers, and it offers it without warning, between one step and the next, an absolute change in the air that is thick enough to feel in the chest as well as the nose. The lane's second smell is just the lane, trying to come back. What the sauce does in the cooking is not what it smells like outside the yard. On a fire with garlic and olive oil, it goes somewhere else entirely, and the people who use it every day are not thinking about the yards when they do. Vibia has used it at the cookshop when it was in the dish, and she knows what it does and she knows where it comes from, and the gap between the two is not a thing she examines. It is a gap everyone lives in. At the gate of the nearest yard, a man is sitting on an upturned bucket with a cloth tied over his face from the nose down, and he has been sitting there long enough that the cloth has gone damp and is pressing in against his mouth when he breathes. He nods at her. The nod is the same nod she has had from the cookshop man and the watch and the lampmaker's boy and the man at the trough. It is the nod for a person known by their route rather than their name. The sauce sells as far as the frontier. Amphorae from the yards on this side of the city have been found as far north as a person can travel in a season and as far east as a different sea. The flavour goes in the jar and the jar goes on the boat and the boat goes out of the river on the tide. What comes back in the same boat is different goods, different smells, different writing on the side of different jars. The yard behind the gate is dark, and she cannot see the vats, but she knows they are there by the smell and by the sound of the liquid in them, which is not sound so much as the absence of silence. The vats are open because the process needs air, and after months of salt and press, the contents are something between a solid and a liquid. There are things in this city she has been alongside every night for years and does not know the shape of, and the vats are one of them. The lane opens at the far end into a small square with a single tree in it and a bench under the tree, and the bench is where the salt porters sit when they are waiting for the gate to open. Salt comes in by river and is stored in a long building on the left side of the square with double doors and iron hinges and a wax seal on the lock that has to be broken every morning and replaced every evening. Selling salt at an unsanctioned price is a matter for the prefect. The tree is an old one with a thick trunk that has grown around the iron pin that was put in it when it was young. The pin is not visible now, just the ripple in the bark where the wood closed over it. Its root has lifted a section of the paving on the east side by the height of 2 coins, and the lifted section is the one she avoids on every pass through the square, stepping over it in the dark by the feel of the approach. You learn a city in the feet. The differences between one paving stone and the next, the place where the crown is higher than it should be, the loose 1-3 steps before the crossing that sounds like a knock. A carrier who has worked the same round for 2 years has the whole of it in the soles and could walk it in a deeper dark than this and not be lost. Vibia knows the route, the loose stone, the gap at the cistern steps, and the worn lip of the corner basin. The far side of the square goes back toward the warehouse lane through an archway that has a gate in it, open at this hour, with one panel swung back against the wall and the other panel missing, taken for something else a long time ago. The archway has a face carved in the keystone, worn smooth, and the face is always at a different angle because the angle of the keystone is the angle of the arch, and she always goes through off-center. On the far side of the arch, the sound changes completely. The square's low enclosed acoustic opens out, the walls step back, and the smell of the warehouses comes in from the right all at once. Grain, then oil, then the fish sauce she just left, which the 4th door will give her again. A cart is being backed in at the far end of the lane, slowly, the driver's voice low and level. The warehouse lane is the longest straight stretch she walks all night. Chapter 9. The warehouse lane behind the river. The lane behind the river runs between storehouses on both sides, and the storehouses are built like nothing else in the city, long and blind and low-shouldered, with doors set at intervals wide enough to take a cart's width and nothing between the doors at all. No shops, no stairs, no lamps in windows. Walking it, you go from a door to a door to a door, and the sound of your own feet comes back off both walls at once. At the base of the walls there are openings the size of a fist, set in a row, a hand above the paving, and cold air comes out of them steadily. The floors inside are carried on low piers with a gap under them, and the vents keep that gap moving. Damp comes up out of this ground all year. Grain that sits on a wet floor is grain nobody buys, and the whole design of the building is an argument with the water table. The smell changes door to door, and it changes completely. Grain smells dry and slightly sweet and dusty in the throat. Oil is heavier and rounder and coats the inside of the nose. There is a door where the smell is fish sauce and she takes that stretch with her mouth shut. Between them there are doors with no smell at all, which means empty, which means somebody is losing money on a lease. A watchman is sitting inside one of the open doorways on a stool tipped back against the frame, with a dog lying across the threshold in front of him. The dog lifts its head, decides, and puts it down again. The man says something to her, 2 words, and she answers with 2 words, and neither of them is a greeting so much as a confirmation that both of them are where they are supposed to be. Jars stand in ranks in the open bay behind him up to the height of her chin, resting in wooden frames because their bases come to a point and they will not stand on stone. The shoulder of each one is painted with a handwritten label, the weight of the jar empty, the weight of what is in it, where it came from, and the name of the merchant who shipped it. The ink is brushed on wet and quickly, and the letters run at the ends of strokes. You could read a whole trade off the side of a jar if you could read. Vibia cannot. And she knows the shapes anyway, the way she knows the letters raised on the lead at the corner without knowing what they say. Wait first, then the long word, then the short one. The frames creak when the man leans on them. The ranks go back into the dark, past the point where the lamp is any use. Further along the lane there is a mound. It has been growing for as long as the storehouses have stood, and it is made of nothing except broken oil jars, the same shape of jar, from the same place, brought up the river, emptied and broken deliberately rather than left whole. A jar that has held oil for a year cannot be used again because the oil has gone into the clay and turns. So the clay stops being a container and becomes fill. The mound is not a heap. The sherds have been carried up and laid in courses, walled at the edges to keep the sides from spreading, with lime thrown in to kill the smell of the residue. There are men who do only this. In the daytime you can see them going up the ramp with baskets on their backs and coming down empty, and the top of the mound is flat, and it is higher every year by about the height of a man's knee. Her errand, that's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. Her errand is at the 4th door from the mound, where a dealer keeps jars that have carried nothing worse than water or wine. He is asleep on a bench inside the bay with a cloak over his face and his tablet on the floor beside him, and she does not wake him. What she has come for is to put a coin into the box chained to the bench leg, and to hear it land on the others, and the sound it makes tells her more about how far along she is than the dealer's tablet would. The jar she is paying for stands 3rd from the end of the 2nd rank, and it is a water jar, wider at the shoulder than the oil ones and flat in the base, and there is a chip out of the rim. That is why she can afford it at all. She puts her hand flat on the shoulder of it. The clay is colder than the air in the bay. She takes her hand away and wipes the dust off it on her hip. Then out of the bay and back into the lane, and the lane has got colder while she was inside it, the way a lane does in the last part of the night when the stone has finished giving back what the day put into it. Ahead, the buildings end and the ground opens and the sound goes wide and loses its walls and the air moves across her face for the first time in an hour. The open ground beyond the storehouses is where the cattle come in. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The grain dock. Between the warehouse lane and the cattle ground there is a dock that is not the river steps and is not the great steps either, a working platform of stone running out into the river on wooden piles, and the piles have been there long enough to have grown a skin of the river, dark and slick from the waterline down. The platform is wider than a lane and lower than the bank, and at this hour it is full of sacks. Grain moves from boat to dock at night and from dock to warehouse at dawn. The night is for the unloading and the dawn is for the measuring, and the measuring has to happen in the warehouse because the grain factors do not stand outside in the morning cold with their tablets when there is a building for them. The sacks wait on the platform under a low roof of rush matting hung on poles, and men sleep against them between the unloading and the measuring. The sacks are big. A man carries one, and it rides across the back of his neck with both ends hanging in front, and he walks with his hands on the ends and his head slightly forward, and his view is the platform at his feet. The walking is done in the one direction, off the boat, across the platform, through the warehouse gate. It is not a long distance, and it does not require navigation, and it is done by feel as much as by sight. A woman is sitting on the warehouse wall at the end of the dock watching the platform. You would not know her job from where you are standing, and that is the point of where she is sitting. She is not involved in the unloading, and she is not there to measure, and her job, which she has invented for herself and which is not a job anyone authorized, is to be the person who says what happened if what happens is not what was supposed to happen. She has been at this dock every unloading night for 2 years. The men on the platform know her name. The sacks weigh what a water jar weighs, give or take. In the cold months, the men who carry them use the weight to get warm. They walk faster than they need to, put more back into the lift, let the back of the neck take a little more. The warmth from it goes inside the tunic and stays there for the length of the platform and drains away at the end of it. Then they go back to the boat and do it again. The boat the grain came off is moored at the end of the dock and riding high, empty, turning very slightly in the current at the length of its rope. The men who own the rope are either on the dock somewhere, or they have been paid already and gone, and the boat belongs to the grain for as long as the grain is on the dock and to nobody in particular after that, which is a condition the boat does not notice. You can stand on a dock and say nothing and still be doing something. Vibia watches the sack carriers for 3 passes each. An old habit from the dock work before the round. The watching is recognition rather than evaluation, one body attending to another's work. She does not say this in words because it does not need words. The woman on the warehouse wall says something to the nearest carrier, and he says something back without stopping, and she writes something on her tablet, and he goes past and comes back empty, and she has already looked away. The tablet is her own property, and the stylus is bone rather than iron, which means she bought both of them. The writing on the tablet is her own system and not a standard one, and she is the only person who reads it. The smell of the dock is the river smell underneath and the grain smell on top, and the grain smell varies by where the grain came from. Tonight it is dry and slightly dusty with a sweetness in it that is not sweet exactly, but what precedes sweetness. The smell of something in good condition rather than bad. A sack of bad grain smells of damp and of the beginning of something nobody wants to find. One of the carriers has a child walking beside him, not small enough to be carried and not large enough to be carrying. She goes at the speed of the man's slow walk with her arms swinging, carrying nothing and helping nothing and present. Nobody says anything to her. She turns at the warehouse gate and walks back beside him to the boat and turns again. They do not speak on the walk. The lamp on the dock is a big one, on a pole, fed with oil from a jar that is replenished twice on unloading. It is the brightest single light she passes all night. Standing in the circle of it makes her visible from the bank, and from the platform, and from across the river, and she is aware of that, and she stands in it anyway while the carrier count goes past 10. Then she goes on toward the bridge. The rope walk. On the long road between the cattle ground and the river steps, there is a stretch where the buildings stop on one side and the ground opens into a space that runs parallel to the road for longer than any building you could put beside it. This is the rope walk. It is a long, narrow, open lane of beaten earth, wider than a cart road, with a spinning post at the far end and a wheel at the near end, and between them, the distance that the length of a rope requires. Rope is made by twisting strands together in one direction until they want to go the other way. It is made in motion. The hemp is combed and spun into yarn at the wheel, and the yarn is twisted into strand at the posts walking outward, and the strand is twisted into rope walking inward, and at each twist the rope shortens and the man walking pays out length to match. It is done walking rather than sitting because the rope's tension must be kept even along its whole length. At this hour the walk is clear, and the posts are bare and the wheel is still, and the ground between them is packed as hard as the cattle ground and pale as stone from the dust of the hemp. The smell of it is dry and fibrous, a little like the smell of the grain but lighter, and it sits in the chest differently. She walks on the road beside it rather than through it because the rope walk is private ground and the road is not. Hemp dust carries, it is on the ground of the walk and in the air above it and on the skin of the men who work there during the day, and they go home in the evening carrying a white haze of it. A rope maker's hands are calloused in a different pattern from a water carrier's. The inside of the finger, not the ridge below it. The web between the thumb and the first finger, not the thumb pad. The hands tell the trade before the trade tells you. The rope goes out of this walk and onto the boats that go down the river and up the river, and onto the cranes at the building sites and the capstans at the docks, and into the wells on the Aventine where the aqueduct does not go, and onto the necks of the animals at the cattle market, and around the loads on the low-bed carts that she crosses behind at the freight street. She walked under a crane rope this morning and did not look up at it. There is a bundle of finished rope coiled on a stand at the near end of the walk, covered with a piece of cloth weighted at the corners. The coil is as wide as she is tall, and as tall as her waist, and the rope in it is the colour of the hemp dust it was made from. In the morning, a man will come and take the cloth off and take the coil's measurement and write it down, and the rope will go to whoever ordered it, or it will not, and then it will stay. She pauses beside the coil and rests her hand on the cloth, and the cloth is stiff with cold. Underneath it, the rope is stiff too, in its particular way, the way something woven and dry is stiff rather than the way stone is stiff. A rope can be stiff and flexible at the same time. She knows the distinction without having the words for it, the way she knows that the paving at the cattle market is slippery in a different way from the wet step. There is a cat on the cloth. She did not see it before she put her hand on the cloth, because the cloth and the cat are the same pale colour in this light, and the cat is asleep on its side with the cloth bunched under it where it found the softest part. It opens one eye and closes it, and the cloth does not move under it at all. A sleeping cat on a rope bundle in the dark is as close to nothing as something can get. The road beyond the rope walk turns and comes close to the water, close enough that the embankment wall is on her right, and the river sound is directly under her feet for a stretch, and the cold of it comes up through the stone. She takes that stretch without slowing. The cold from the paving and from the wall meet at her knees, and she is aware of exactly where. The river steps are below the embankment wall, and the stairs down to them are cut into the wall face, with iron handrails on both sides set into the stone. The handrails are cold enough at this hour to hold the frost in a band where the metal is. She takes the stairs with one hand on the rail and holds the cold without pulling away, because the rail keeps her on the stone rather than off it. At the bottom of the stairs, the broad steps down to the water begin, and the sounds from the dock and from the lighter being warped in come up to her all at once, together, off the face of the embankment. The lighter's rope goes taut, and the current takes the slack out of it, and the boat swings in and touches the stone. She arrives at the bottom of the stair as the lighter is being made fast. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. Chapter 10. The Cattle Ground. The open ground is the biggest flat space she crosses all night, and it is never empty. It is the cattle market, and the city named it after them. Hurdles are set up in blocks across the middle, lashed at the corners, and the animals stand in them in the dark, packed close enough to keep each other warm. You hear the ground before the beasts because 100 hooves shifting on beaten earth is a sound with no edges to it. The breath of the herd goes up in a body of vapour that you can see against the sky where the sky is lighter, and the whole enclosure is 2 or 3 degrees warmer than the lane she came out of, and the warmth has a weight to it. Dung, straw, wet hide, and the sweetness of the fodder they were given at the gate. It gets into the cloth of her tunic within 100 paces and rides home with her. The drovers sleep against the outside of the hurdles with their backs to the wood, wrapped to the chin, hats down. They came in with the animals along roads that are open to herds at hours when they are closed to wheels, and they have walked further this week than she walks in a season. One of them has his dog inside his cloak with only its head out, and the dog watches her go by and does not lift itself. Underfoot, the ground is packed to the hardness of floor tile and slick in patches, and the slick patches are the ones to put a whole foot down on rather than a heel. Her soles find no purchase on beaten earth the way they find it on stone, and she takes shorter steps for it. She walks the edge of the open ground, not the middle. The middle is where the sales happen when the light comes, and where the standing water gathers when it rains, and there is no reason to be in it now. At the near end there is a bronze bull on a plinth, life-sized, standing square with its head slightly up, and the metal of its back is polished where hands have gone over it. It has stood there long enough that nobody thinks about who put it up. The bull is how you give directions in that quarter. Meet me by the bull, and everybody knows, and the animals in the hurdles behind it have never been given a second thought by any of them. Beyond the bull, on the riverside, there is an enclosure with a low wall round it, and inside the wall, a long altar of stone, plain, blackened along the top and down one side. It is the oldest thing she passes on the whole of her round. There is no roof over it, and there never was. The wall keeps the traffic off it and does not keep the weather off, and grass comes up through the joints on the shaded side. Women do not sacrifice at that altar. No woman takes part in the rite there, and no woman is served from what is offered, and the rule is old enough that the reason given for it is a story rather than an ordinance. Vibia has walked past it 400 nights. The custom is a fact about the altar in the way that the height of the wall is a fact about the altar. She notes where the wall is because of where she can set the jar down. A merchant coming in with a cargo gives 1/10 of it at that altar, and what is given is eaten there, inside the enclosure, on the day, and none of it goes out through the gap in the wall. The eating is done standing and bareheaded. What is left over is burned rather than carried off. The smell of a tithe feast 3 streets downwind is the smell of an ordinary kitchen made 100 times larger. Tonight the enclosure is dark and holds nothing except its own cold and a cat's business. She sets the jar's base on the top course of the wall, which is exactly the height that lets her take the weight off her spine without unloading, and she stands with her hands hooked over the rim and her forehead against the clay, and she breathes into the space between the jar and her arm where it is warm. The herd noise behind her goes on without a change in it. A beast lows once, low and short, and 2 others answer at the same pitch, and then it goes back to hooves and breathing. Somewhere on the far side of the hurdles, a bucket goes down on stone. The sky over the river has not changed yet in colour, and has changed in something else, in the way a room changes before anyone in it has woken. From the wall, it is a short walk to the water, down between the last of the storehouses, and the paving gives out into steps at the end of it. She lifts the jar off the wall and settles it, and does not roll the shoulder this time. The air coming up from the river is colder than anything since the stairwell. The steps go down to the water and they are wide enough for a cart to be backed onto. The Night Cistern Road. After the grain dock, the road follows the water eastward because the road and the aqueduct branch above it were both built to the same destination and the road simply never left it. On the left, the embankment wall runs continuous, and on the right, there are loading yards with their gates shut, and between them the road is wide and empty, and the sound of walking on it comes back off both walls with a delay she can feel in the joints of her feet. The branch channel is not visible from the road. It runs behind the embankment wall at a height 2 feet above the road surface, which is the fall it needs to reach the cistern house 2 miles further up the slope. What is visible is the maintenance access, iron doors set into the face of the wall at intervals, each one painted red and sealed with a lead disc stamped by the water office. None of the seals on these doors has been broken in her time on this road. Water theft from an aqueduct branch is a matter of record and of consequence, and the number set on it is high enough that the seals stay intact. The paint stays red. The water office checks the doors on a schedule she has never worked out from observation. She has seen the checker once in 2 years, coming the other way with a lamp and a tablet and a tool for checking the lead, nodding at her with the nod of a man who has himself been noted. At the third access door, a cat sits on the threshold lip. It is a specific cat. 3-coloured, missing the tip of one ear, resident on this road since before Vibia came to the round. She has no idea where it sleeps or what it eats. She has never seen it eat. She has never seen it move faster than a slow walk. It exists on this road at this hour as something between a fact and a habit, and she nods at it the way the waterman nodded at her. The cat's ear was a different damage when she first came this way. The original tear has healed and been retorn and healed again, and the current shape of it is the result of that history rather than a single event. She knows this without having watched it happen. The ear is a record of the road's nights, and she is a record of the road's nights, and neither of them is the record the water office keeps in its tablets. The road past the third door opens slightly, where a building came down on the right side and has not been rebuilt. The rubble was cleared, but the ground was not built on, and what grows in it is whatever grew in the cleared ground, which is low scrub and the volunteers from whatever seeds blew in. In the dark, it is a smell more than a shape, dry vegetation, the slight sweetness of something that flowered in the autumn and is done. She has passed this gap enough times to know which plants are in it by the season. In the hot months, the smell of it is green and sharp, and the scrub is shoulder height, and the cats use it. In the cold months, the scrub is low and dry and crackling, and she has heard a mouse in it and wants something larger that she did not identify. Now it smells of the end of things, the cold stalks of plants that finished their work months ago and are standing on the result. The gap in the buildings lets the sky in. She can see more of it here than anywhere between the buildings, a wide strip running east to west, and the stars in it are the ones she is used to at this point of the night, lower in the west than they were when she left the building, the same ones she uses without deciding to locate herself in the night's arc. The brightest one is still where it was an hour ago from this road. The next hour will move it. She is carrying the empty jar toward the second fill, and the empty jar is not lighter in the way that the body expects it to be. The shoulder knows the difference. The bone moves differently without the rim, but the muscles that have been managing the jar's weight all night have not let go of it yet. They are still working. This will last until she is off the road and sitting, and it passes in the time it takes the body to believe what its hands are already telling it. The cistern house is at the end of this stretch, and she can see the lamp above it from here, a fixed lamp on a post kept burning all night by the cistern keeper who lives in the room behind the locked door and whose job is the lamp and the lock and the record of who approaches. You learn a man by his lamp. She has been on his record for 2 years and never spoken to him. She knows him entirely by the lamp being on. The trough beside the cistern house catches the first light best because it faces east and the stone is pale. The pale stone reads against the wall behind it just enough to find from 20 paces. She has been heading for this trough since she left the stairwell. The tanner's yard. The slope on the far side of the bridge is steeper than the city slope on the near bank, and the road up it is wider, and the wideness is for the animals that come down it in both directions all day, cattle and pigs and sheep in one direction, and the people who went out with them in the other. At this hour it is empty, and it sounds empty, which is not the same as the lanes being empty. An empty lane has walls and a sky above them. This road has sky on both sides. At the top of the first rise, the road levels for a street's length and then rises again, and the flat stretch is where the tanners are, because the tanners need the water that comes down the hill from the aqueduct's eastern branch, and they need to be far enough from the city that the smell is the city's problem only on the days when the wind is from the west. Tanneries must by law be outside the walls. The law has been on record long enough that nobody argues with it. The process is long. Hides arrive from the butchers and the cattle market, and they go into pits of lime first to loosen the hair, and then the hair comes off with a scraping tool on a beam, and then the hides go into the bark pits, which are the deep ones, and they stay there for a year before anyone calls them leather. A tannery in full operation is working on hides at 5 different stages at once. The pits for each stage have their own character. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. The lime pits give off a smell that is caustic and dry and sits in your eyes. The bark pits smell of wet earth and old wood and something underneath both that you cannot easily name. Between the pits, the men who work the yards smell of all of it at once, and they know the difference between stages by the smell and not by anything written down, and they do it the way she knows the corner basins, or, by accumulation, by the body rather than the mind. At this hour the pits are closed and the yard gate is barred, and the smell comes over the wall rather than out of it. She goes past on the roadside, which is the downwind side tonight, and the smell reaches her at about shoulder height. Her eyes water a little from the lime edge. Her jar on the left shoulder is cold in the band, and she runs her thumb under the rim to ease it without stopping. The man who keeps the lime pit record at a yard in this district has a tablet with 200 entries on it going back 3 years, and the entries are hides received, hides passed, hides sold, and the name of whoever brought them in. Nobody has ever put a woman's name in that tablet. The hides come from the cattle market, where women do not sacrifice, and from the butcher's yards, where women buy but do not slaughter. The record begins after her. There is a sound from inside the yard that is not the pits. A scraping, slow and deliberate, stopping and starting, coming from the beam room where the hides are worked after the lime. Somebody is in there with a hide over the beam and a tool in both hands, working by whatever light they have brought with them. The scraping is the blade going the same way each time, short strokes, following the grain. It is a sound that is not unpleasant at this distance. She has passed this yard 200 times in the dark and has never been inside it. She knows its smell and its gate and the height of its wall and the tree that has grown against the wall from the outside, which drops leaves on the road in autumn that go slick and make that stretch of road a particular problem for 5 weeks in the year. She knows the wall the way she knows the stairwell, well enough that knowing is no longer the right word. Beyond the tanneries, the road is clean again, the way the road is clean on the far side of any industry, and the cold comes in undiluted. A fire is visible on the hill above her, small and steady, not moving. which means a workshop and not a cart. She has not been up to that fire. She does not go above this road on the other side of the bridge, which means there are things on this slope that she knows only as light sources. The road turns right and begins to drop toward the river again, running parallel to the bridge approach, and the cattle ground comes into view across the water, lit by its own warmth and the fires of the night market traders who have set up just outside the gate. She is on the wrong side of the river for the morning she needs, and the bridge is behind her now, and her third fill is on the other bank. She turns back toward the bridge at the pace she came up. The horse on the towpath below has stopped, and the rope it was pulling has gone slack. A barge is being warped into the bank with poles. She goes past the tannery gate again, and the lime smell again, and down the slope again, and none of it is the same going this way. The bridge at the far end of the slope is lit from under by the lamp on the stern of the tied barge. Chapter 11. The River Steps. The steps go down in a broad flight from the quay to the water, and they are wet for the last 4 courses, and the wet is not rain. The river takes them and gives them back twice a day and leaves a line of grey silt at the height it reached, and the silt is slick and holds the print of a foot for hours. The water itself is not visible from the top. With nothing lit along either bank, there is no shine on it at all. You know where the surface is by the sound and by the cold. There is a slap under the stone, irregular, and a longer draw behind it, and between the two the smell of the water comes up. Mud, weed, the ends of things. The cold that comes off a river at the end of the night is different from the cold of a lane. It arrives in one piece, and it goes through cloth as though the cloth were not an argument. A lighter is tied at the bottom of the steps with its bow into the stone and its stern out in the current, and it is riding low, and men are getting sacks off it one at a time onto their shoulders and coming up. They come up on the outside of the flight where the stone is dry, and they go down on the inside where it is not, and the two lines pass each other without a word being needed about it. The boats do not come up the river under their own power. Men on the bank pull them. Ropes go from the mast to a harness across the chest, and a gang leans into the harness and walks the towpath, and a loaded hull comes up against the current at the pace of a person carrying something heavy uphill. The rope wears a groove in the shoulder of the man who takes the front position. That groove is a trademark. On the quay above, a measure has been set out on a board, and a man is filling it from a sack, and a second man is watching him do it. The measure is filled proud, and then struck level with a rod, and what falls off the top falls onto a cloth spread for it, and goes back into the sack. A measure filled heaping and a measure struck level are 2 different quantities, and every quarrel on this quay is about which one was agreed. The measurer works with his knees bent and his weight over the board and does not look at either man, and the rod goes across the rim in one pass, always in the same direction, drawn toward himself. The count is said aloud at every 10th. When a sack is done, the carrier's tag is taken off his neck and a notch is cut into the edge of it with a knife, and the tag goes back over his head and he goes down the steps again. The man from the bakery step is standing at the top of the flight with his tag out in his hand and his shins grey to the knee from the shallows where the lighter grounded before it warped in. He was waiting for the boat. It came up late, as boats do, and the waiting is unpaid, and the mud dried on him while he sat in the warm by the door. He is in the line now with his hands full and his face gone slack with the work. Vibia stands out of the way of both lines with her back against the parapet. The parapet is the coldest stone she has touched tonight. There is nothing for her here. No basin, no household, no tally. And she stops anyway, for as long as it takes a boat to be got half empty, because the steps at this hour are the one place on her round where she is not the only person carrying something. Downstream of the steps, there is an arch in the embankment, wide enough to drive a cart through, and everything the city has finished with comes out of it. The great drain empties there, and it empties all night. The sound of it is steady and heavy and stands underneath the sound of the river, and the water in front of it is paler than the water further out, and nothing is tied up within 50 paces of it on either side. That drain begins in the low ground under the market floor and runs under the streets she has walked, and everything that went into the shaft in the courtyard and over the lip of the corner basin arrives here, in the dark, without anybody having attended to it. It is the reason the low ground can be built on at all. She has never once seen it clear its own mouth, and she has heard it 1,000 times. The lines on the steps thin out, and the carriers begin to sit down on the stone in 1s and 2s where they are. She turns and goes back up the flight and across the quay with the jar knocking once against the parapet at the turn. The ground begins to rise almost at once. Her calves report the change before her head does, and the wet of the silt comes off her soles within 30 paces and leaves them tacky. From here the whole of the rest of the night is uphill. Chapter 12. The Last of the Climb. At the foot of the slope there is a cistern house, a squat building with a barrel roof and a door that is always locked, and the water comes out of the side of it into a trough at knee height through a bronze spout with a horse's head on it. She fills here for the second time. There is nobody else at this one, and no queue and no talking, and the filling takes as long as it takes, and she watches the roofline while it does. The pipe runs out of the cistern house wall and along the top of the trough before it turns down into the spout, and it is lead, and there is lettering raised along it. It is the same lettering as the pipe at her own corner, the same words in the same order, in the same size. Every length that came out of that yard carries the name of the yard, rolled into the sheet before it was bent round the core. That is all it is. The name in the metal belongs to the workshop that cast the pipe. It is on pipes all over the city, in basins she has never stood at, under floors she will never be in. The letters stand proud of the surface by about the thickness of a fingernail, and the tops of them are worn flat along the trough length because people rest their hands there while they wait. She rests her hand there while she waits. The climb begins immediately after the trough, and it does not let up. It goes up in a series of turns with steps at the tightest of them, and the steps are of unequal height, and you learn their heights in the feet and never afterward have to think about them. Loaded, she takes the whole climb without stopping, because stopping is a decision that would have to be made again at the top. The heat arrives about a third of the way up. It comes from inside, in the chest and the face, and it meets the cold of the night on the skin, and the two of them settle into an arrangement where the front of her is warm and the back of her is not. Her breath begins to sound. The jar rides steady. The pad does what a pad does, which is spread a hard rim across a shoulder that has already given up. Water goes where the ground lets it and no higher. It comes into the city on a fall and it can only come out below the height it came in at. Everything above that line gets nothing. The top rooms of every block and the ground up here which stands higher than the channel that serves the quarter below it. There is no machinery in this city that will lift water up a hill to a household. There are carriers. The house she delivers to has a door at the top of 6 steps and a bell pull she does not use because the pull wakes the whole passage, and there is an arrangement instead. 2 taps on the frame with the flat of the hand. The woman who opens it is about her own age and holds the door with her foot and takes the jar off the shoulder with both hands, and the transfer is done in one movement they have practiced without ever discussing. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. Inside, past the woman's arm, there is a jar of the same size standing in a stone ring in the floor, and the water goes from one into the other through a funnel, and it goes fast because the mouth of the funnel is wide. Vibia stands on the step while it happens. The passage smells of last night's cooking and of a floor washed with something. The woman hands back the empty and says the number of nights, and Vibia says the number back to her. Going down the 6 steps with an empty jar is the lightest she has been since the courtyard, and her body does not trust it, and she goes down them the same careful way she came up. On the landing below, somebody has set a pot of green stuff out in the cold for the night and covered it over with a tile. A shutter opens 2 floors above and closes again without anything being emptied out of it. The high ground at this hour has almost no sound of its own. The freight is all below and behind her, and up here there is wind, which never reaches the lanes she works in, and it comes across the top of the hill and finds the wet cloth on her shoulder at once. She turns the pad over and puts the dry side down. The sky in the east has gone from black to something that is not yet a colour. From up here she can see where she is going and where she has been, which is a thing she gets once a night and does not stop for. The roofs go down in steps below her, and the lanes between them are black, and the shutters are all shut. The way home runs down and then along, and there is one place left on it that will be busy, and she can hear it already as a difference in the general sound, a low broken murmur with wood in it. The market sets up while it is still dark. The stonecutter's yard. The road from the river steps goes up and angles left, and the left angle is the beginning of the climb back to her own ground. Where the road angles, there is a yard that has been cut into the base of the hill rather than built on top of it, and the cutting shows in the face of the retaining wall, which is raw stone below and dressed stone above from where the original ground level was. The yard floor is the bedrock. Stone cutting is done outside because the dust fills every space it is given. You breathe it when you pass and you taste the grit of it at the back of the throat. The stone dust here has settled into the surface of everything. The raw face of the wall, the wooden uprights of the lean-to at the back, the iron rings where animals are tied when the stone arrives. It is a fine white dust and it moves in any air and settles when the air stops. At this hour it has been still long enough to coat the yard to a uniform paleness. The lean-to holds the tools. Chisels racked on pegs in size order from the longest to the point where they are too small to peg and are stored in a clay pot instead. Wooden mallets in two sizes, the heads worn oval from use. A set of rods for measuring, calibrated with scratched lines and hanging on a cord from the rafters. Squares and levels propped against the back post. Everything in that lean-to is covered in the same white. A half-finished piece stands in the middle of the yard on a low wooden platform, and it is a column drum 2 hands taller than her, cut to a cylinder and not yet fluted. The top surface has layout lines scored into it in a grid, and the grid will be where the fluting channels run, and the channels will be cut by a man standing on a scaffold leaning in at the same angle for every channel, so they are all the same depth. A column drum of this size weighs what a cart horse weighs. It arrived on a low cart and was slid off the cart onto rollers and rolled into the yard on the rollers and lifted onto the platform by a gin pole and lines and a number of men. It will leave the same way. The gin pole leans against the far wall and the lines are coiled on a wooden drum beside it, and neither of them suggests how heavy the column was or the kind of mathematics the men used to persuade it to move. There is a lamp on a post at the entrance to the lean-to and it puts out just enough light to see the yard without seeing into it. It is the second lamp she has seen tonight that does not belong to anyone in particular, and she is less surprised by it here than she would have been at the basin, because a yard with a column in it needs a lamp visible to people passing so they do not walk into the column. She sets the jar on the retaining wall and stretches the shoulder back in a movement that does no good and that she does anyway. The stone of the wall is the same stone as the column drum and it is cold through the hand. The whole of this wall is cold because it faces north and the slope above it keeps the sun off it for most of the day, and at this hour the cold in it is the accumulated cold of many days without direct warmth. The column drum is a different cold. She puts her palm on it without thinking. The way she put her palm on the bakery wall, and where the bakery wall gave warmth back, the stone takes warmth in and holds it and gives nothing. Stone does this. Her grandmother's name is carved in a stone in a district she did not grow up in, on a tomb that belongs to the family who owned her, and the cold in it keeps the letters sharp, which is not a comfort and is not meant as one. A man's voice comes from somewhere above the retaining wall, from the slope she cannot see from the yard. It says one word and stops. She waits, and no second word comes, and no answer comes, and she waits a moment more, and then takes her hand off the stone and picks up the jar. The voice does not come again. She has heard voices with no apparent source at this hour before, and the wall is a known carrier. A yard with high walls at night is an ear. The road past the yard begins to climb in earnest, and the left wall comes in close, and the right wall goes away, and the lane becomes a staircase of flat stone treads cut into the rock of the slope. 6 treads and a landing, and 6 more, and the landings are where the water breaks off to the side in the wet months and leaves a silt line on the wall for the rest of the year. It is dry now. The steps are only the steps, and they take her weight without any remaining surprise. At the top of the stair, the hill opens out and the sky comes in from both sides. The road that crosses the hill east to west is the one the market faces onto, and the smell of cut stalks and wet earth is already in the air, stronger on the right where the trestles are going up, thinner on the left where the road turns toward the hill. She does not turn left yet. The light in the east has not changed colour, and the market can already tell. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. Chapter 13. The Green Market Setting Up. The market is a square with a colonnade round 3 sides of it, and at this hour it is full of people who are not selling yet. Trestles are being carried in on shoulders, 2 to a man, and dropped and squared, and boards go across them, and the sound of a board landing on a trestle is the sound the square makes over and over for the length of an hour. Nobody has lit more than they need to. Under the colonnade, the stone floor is marked. There are lines cut into it, and rubbed patches and old scratches where a foot of a stall has stood in the same place for years, and the marks are how the pitches are kept. The place a woman sells from belongs to her by the fact that everybody knows it is hers. No document is involved. A stall set down a hand's width into somebody else's mark gets moved before the boards are on. The greens come in on donkeys and on backs and in two-wheeled handcarts pulled by their owners from the gardens outside the walls where the ground is watered, and the growing is done close in for exactly this reason. Cabbage, leeks, beet leaves, onions in ropes. The smell in the square at this hour is cut stalk and wet earth and crushed leaf, and it is the cleanest smell on the whole of Vibia's round. Water is thrown over the greens by hand out of a shallow pan, in an arc, and it is done twice before the light comes and again at the middle of the morning. Wet leaves stand up, dry leaves lie down and tell everybody how long they have been cut. The water for that comes up from the basin by the jar and it is bought. Vibia has sold 4 jars a morning into this square in a bad week for the fullery. The market comes round on the 8th day. The country people count to it, and the calendars mark it with a letter, the same 8 letters running over and over through the year, so that anybody can see at a glance which day the carts come in. On the day itself, the square holds 3 times what it holds now. Tonight is not the day, so what is being set up is the ordinary morning, which is smaller and less patient. In the corner nearest the colonnade, a woman is laying out bunches on a board in rows, and the bunches are herbs rather than vegetables tied at the stem with rush, and she sets them stem forward so a hand can take one without touching the leaf. She works from a basket at her feet. Her fingers are stained dark green in the creases, and the stain has been there for so many years that it reads as part of the skin. A girl of about 11 comes into the square with 2 bundles under her arm and sets them on the board and says something short, and the woman takes them without looking up. They are the cuttings from yesterday, the ones not sold, kept in the dark overnight in a cool place so they would hold. The girl carried them down from the room and left them on the step below the door so she would not have to go back in for them. That is the bundle on the lower step of the descent, tied round twice with rush, sitting where a foot would not find it. It goes out at the end of the evening and comes down at the end of the night. The knot is the same knot every time because the girl was taught it once and has had no reason to be taught another. Vibia has stepped over 3 months of it without ever putting the 2 ends of it together. You could stand in the middle of this square for the whole of the hour and never be spoken to. Everybody has a task with a shape to it, and the tasks do not require conversation, and what is said in fragments, half of it numbers. A man goes past with a stack of empty baskets that reaches above his head, holding the whole column by the bottom one. Somebody counts leeks in tens under their breath. The cold in the square is the flat, even cold of open ground. That's the only thing I'll ask tonight. Subscribe. Everything after this is just the story. The colonnade catches the first change in the light before the open square does, high up on the undersides of the arches, where it goes from black to grey without any event in between. The women at the boards do not look up at it. They know it by the temperature, which drops a little just before, the way it does, and they put their hands under their arms for a moment and then take them out again. Vibia buys nothing. She stands at the edge of the colonnade with the jar between her feet and her shoulder against a column, and lets the smell of the greens work on her, and watches a boy try and fail to square a trestle that has 1 leg shorter than the other 3. He solves it with a folded rag pushed under with his heel. Home is 4 turns and 1 flight of stairs from the far corner of the square. The herb garden on the slope. The road past the market turns uphill and narrows, and 20 paces up it there is a wall on the right with a wooden gate in it, and through the gate a garden that does not belong to a house. The wall is low enough to see over, and she has looked over it enough times to know what is in there. Rows of low plants on terraces cut into the slope, and at the top of the terraces a shed with a table in it and a lamp on the table. The lamp in the shed is a present she planted long ago in her own private map of this hill, the way you plant things you pass often and know nothing about. It burns all night in the shed and nobody tends it while it burns. She has never seen it go out, which does not mean it does not go out. It means nobody is at the gate when it does. The plants in the rows below it smell of thyme and of the cold version of rosemary, which is sharper than the warm. Herbs were grown on this ground before the road was laid. The terraces are older than the wall. You can see where the terrace edges have been cut and recut over many seasons, each cut going slightly further into the slope and leaving a line of old clay behind the new clay that shows the previous edge like a shadow. The soil on the terraces is deep and dark and brought up from the low ground in baskets, and it is not the soil of the hill. A woman is moving along the rows with a lamp in her left hand and a knife in her right. She goes slowly. The lamp is held to the side rather than in front, so the light falls across the plants from an angle rather than on top of them, and at that angle the stems and leaves cast shadows that tell her something about the condition of the plant that looking straight down would not. She cuts what she cuts without a pause. The rest she passes over. The girl from the herb stall in the market comes here before the market opens, and she comes with a basket. And the basket is the one that appeared on the step 2 nights running, tied round with rush. The cutting tonight is what the basket will carry tomorrow morning. The lamp in the shed has been burning all night because someone has been in the garden all night. The lamp belongs to the work, not to anyone watching. Vibia stands at the gate for as long as it takes the woman to move from the near end of the row to the middle. The smell of the cut herbs travels over the wall, and it is the smell of the morning market made earlier in the night, made right at the root rather than from the cut end. She breathes it in, and it is the cleanest cold she has had since the river air, but this cold has green in it. The cut from a fresh herb stem is a small violence, and the smell that comes from it is defense, not scent. The plant makes it for its own reasons, and the person cutting is incidental to those reasons. This is a thing Vibia knows without the words for it, the way she knows the smell of the shaft and the smell of the clay and the smell of the lead pipe warmed by morning. The city is full of processes that are not about her and that she moves through. The woman at the far end of the row reaches the end of it, turns and starts back. She is not hurrying. She has 2 more rows after this one, and the light is exactly where it should be, and nothing about her pace suggests she has counted the time wrong. Her lamp is steady. The gate latch on the street side is a ring of iron on a pin, and Vibia closes her hand around it to feel the cold of it and then lets it go. The rushes that tie the herb bundles come from the low ground by the river, where they grow in the bank and are cut in the hot months and dried for the winter, and a good rush holds for a day and a bad one does not, and the choice of which one you tie with tells the buyer something about how the seller works. The bundles in the market tomorrow will be tied with a double loop and a knot that cinches rather than slips. The girl was shown that knot once. She comes away from the gate and her shoulder reminds her that she has the jar up and has had it up for longer than she has been standing still. The jar's weight is the same as it always is, and she has been carrying it so long it has become a fact about her body rather than an object attached to it. The climb from here goes east and then north and then east again, and each turn of it is shorter and more familiar. The sky has gone from black to the colour of cold ash, and cold ash has the quality of giving off a little of its own light rather than receiving it from somewhere, and the roof lines at the top of the hill are beginning to separate from the sky behind them. She has seen this sky 1,000 times. She turns toward the last part of the climb, and the sky lightens at a rate too slow to see and too fast to stop. The slope before the last delivery. The road that goes up from the cistern house is the quietest road she has been on since she left the building. It goes between old walls with no shops in them and no windows at street level, only the high openings that belong to a different century of building, and the sound it gives her souls is not the street sound. It is the sound of a lane that has not changed its use and has no reason to. She has the full jar on the left shoulder, and the city behind her, and the house in front, and the night is narrowing to its last task the way a night does, when the things ahead of you are fewer, and the things behind you are all done, and the weight you are carrying is simply the weight you are carrying, not a burden and not a metaphor, a jar of water at 2/3 of the way through the climb. The gradient here is steady, and it asks the same thing of the body for the entire length, which is different from the stepped descent and from the long flat of the warehouse lane. A steady gradient is something you can put your breath into. The breath goes in through the nose and out through the mouth, and the interval between them gets longer as the body settles into the work, and the longer interval is the thing she is looking for. No wheeled vehicle can be driven up this road after the 2nd hour. It is too steep for a loaded cart and too narrow for the return, and the men who tried it before the rule was made are why the rule was made. The ruts from those attempts are still in the stone, ending at the bend where the axle went into the wall, and the wall has been patched in a different stone that is still not matched in colour. Up here, the city is making less sound than it was an hour ago. The market is not up yet in the main square, and the freight has thinned, and the ovens are between batches, and the only sound that carries to this height is the continuous one. The water, the cattle, and a distant single dog that has been at the same note since before midnight. The dog is either answering something too far away to hear, or it has an argument with something inside itself. Her left foot has been finding the edge of her sandal since the rope walk, and she should have retied it then and did not, and now the tie is working itself looser with each step and will have to be dealt with before the last flight of stairs. She knows exactly when it will fail. She has had this particular sandal long enough to know its habits, and it fails at the inside edge of the left thong and not at the right. She stops at the flat place below the last turn and sets the jar down on the wall there and crouches to retie it, and the crouching after a long carry sends blood to things that were not getting enough, and the tops of her feet tingle, and the tingle is not unpleasant. The wall under her hand is the oldest stone on this climb. It is dressed differently from the newer masonry, in longer blocks with tighter joints. An inscription is cut into the block at eye level from the crouch. It is worn past reading in the middle, but the first letter and the last letter of the first line are clear enough, and between them there would have been a name. She does not know whose it was. It is one of several things on this hill she knows by touch rather than meaning, and the touching is its own kind of knowing, the way carrying a root is knowing. The thong is retied in the same knot she always uses, which is not the strongest knot for the purpose, and is the one her hands know how to make without looking. She stands up, and the jar goes back up, and the weight comes back at the same level it left. The last turn of the climb is ahead, and the turn goes right, and she takes the inside of it, and the house door is 23 steps from the turn. 23 steps. She has counted them often enough to have stopped counting them, which means they have become the steps, and are no longer a number. The lamps in the block above are all dark. The sky above the roofline is the colour it was at the cistern house and at the market, and the colour is still not day, and yet she can see the outline of the roof against it without the lamp in her hand. The lamp is turned down as far as a lamp turns. She climbs the last of it without stopping. Her knees do what they do, and her shoulder does what it does, and both of them are doing it without her particular input at this point in the night. The door she is delivering to is at the top of 6 steps, and she can see its lintel from the last landing, and the lintel is a detail she has never been above and never been below. The stone is warm under her soles from the whole of the day that preceded her. Chapter 14. The Way Back Up. The 4 turns out of the square go uphill at a gradient her legs have stopped registering as a gradient. She takes them on the inside of each bend where the paving is least worn, and the jar rides on the right shoulder now, which it does only on the way home, because the right shoulder has no band and objects to it, and the objection is a way of keeping herself awake for the last part. The lane she comes into is her own, and it has changed since she left it. The shutters at the shop below are unbarred and stacked against the wall, and the vat is uncovered, and the man is standing over it with a stick doing whatever he does to it first. He does not turn round. The smell that came into the room through the window all night is stronger down here at the source, and she is used to it. The freight has thinned. There is one cart still coming down, and it is going slowly because the driver has been driving all night, and the beast is going at its own pace and being permitted to. The rims sound different on wet stone than they did on dry, and the stone is wet now. Not from the basin, from the air, which has cooled to the point where it puts itself down on things. Every surface you would put a hand on now is damp. She fills the tub before she goes up, 4 dippers from the corner and 2 trips, and the second trip is the one that costs, and she does it because a full tub on the morning of a day she means to sleep through is the difference between being left alone and being knocked for. The lid goes down with the chipped side to the wall. Her hands are so cold now that the water in the tub feels warm to them. The alcove at the foot of the stairs has the pot back in it, rinsed, upside down on a tile. The bar is out of its brackets at the street door and stood on end where it lives, and the man who sleeps in the alcove in the wet months has been through and left the broken stool where it was. She sets her hand on the newel and starts up, and the first flight is the only one she has to think about. The door on the second landing is shut. No light under it, no warmth off it, no sound behind it. The gap has been closed with the door pulled to and the latch dropped, which happens when the oil goes and the work is done and there is nothing left to keep warm for. The stripe of soot above the frame is still there. It will be there tomorrow, and the door will be open 2 fingers again by the time she comes down. Above the second landing, the stairs go from brick to wood, and the temperature comes up a degree at the join, going this way, which is the same information arriving backwards. The treads take her weight and give their sounds in the order she expects. She goes up close to the wall on the 2 she does not trust. Her thigh muscles have gone from complaining to simply reporting, which is the state they stay in for the rest of the day. The room has 1 person in it. The woman she shares with has gone down already with her tray and her cloth, and the child has gone with her, and the bed is empty, and the blanket thrown back the way it is thrown back when 2 people got out in a hurry. The straw still holds the shape of the 3 of them. She stands in the doorway a moment, and does not go to it yet, and the room is colder than the stairwell was, which is what a room does after a night with the shutter open. The jar goes back into its ring of dried mud in the corner, upright, mouth clear of the wall, base seated in the mark it has made over 2 years of nights. She takes the pad off the shoulder last of all and hangs it on the hook, and the shoulder underneath it is white in the band and red at the edges of the band, and she does not look at it, because looking at it does not change what it does tomorrow. The shutter is open a hand's width where she left it, and the light coming in is grey and flat and has no direction to it. It falls on the floorboards and stops there. Down in the lane, a woman calls a name twice and gets an answer on the 3rd. Somewhere in the building, a shutter is thrown fully open and knocks the wall, and the sound of the whole city coming up is a sound she will be asleep inside of. She lies down on the side the child was on, facing the wall, with her knees drawn up and her left arm under her head so the shoulder has nothing on it. The straw takes a long moment to settle and then holds. Her feet are the last part of her to stop, and they stop the way a cart stops, in stages. The grey at the window does not reach the corner where the jar is. The city is loudest in the hours she is not in it. The barber's bench. The barber works at a bench outside in the lane rather than inside a room, and the bench is always there from the 2nd hour of the day until the 7th, and tonight it is stacked with clean cloths on one end and the tools wrapped in their roll on the other. The chair is a heavy wooden thing with no back and no cushion, and it has sat in the same place for long enough that the feet have left marks in the paving. Nobody is in the chair at this hour. The bench is covered with a board, and the board is held down with a stone at each end, and in the morning the board will come off, and the bench will be open, and the tools will come out of the roll. The barber's chair is always in the lane, because a man having his beard done is a public event. It is a place where news moves, where the names of people change hands. The man who works this bench knows the names of 300 people in the quarter by their faces. He knows which ones have been coming to him since they were boys, and which ones came once and did not return. And the one who came once and did not return is the most interesting one to him. The names he knows are not on any list. They are a list of their own kind, kept entirely in his head and accurate. A barber's tools are razors of iron, an iron mirror, a basin, a sponge, and combs of bone. The roll that holds them has been rolled so many times in the same order that it remembers its shape with nothing in it. The razors are honed every morning on a stone before anyone sits down, and the stone is kept under the bench in a clay pot with a lid, and the lid has a piece of cork wedged in it to make it fit. The chair sits at the corner of the lane, and the corner is where the morning traffic will concentrate. The men going to their work, and the men being seen at their work, and the men who conduct their business in the lane rather than in a room, which is most of them. The chair is at the corner so that the men in it face outward, and the men passing can see who is in it. That is the whole of the arrangement. She has sat in that chair once 3 years ago when she cut her hair short for a reason she does not carry with her anymore. She does not come to this barber now. Her hair has been cut since by whoever was in the room and had a knife and a spare moment, and the cut is not even, and she does not look at it. The pad on her shoulder has gone better since then, easier to seat, less likely to fold under the rim. The tools in the roll include a needle and thread, because a razor taken across a chin for the 10th time that morning is a razor that finds something eventually, and finding it requires the same remedy as finding it anywhere else. The needle and thread are the smallest items in the roll, and they are wrapped separately in a piece of linen, and they are the tools the barber reaches for with the least hesitation. There is a lamp attached to the corner of the building above the bench, a fixed one in an iron bracket, low enough to light the work below it and high enough to be out of reach. The lamp is not lit at this hour, and the bench and the chair are in the dark they have been in since the 6th hour, and the wrapped tools do not need light for what they are not doing. Everything in the lane is waiting for the same thing. You would not know from the tools in the roll or the shape of the chair what this work costs. A shave costs what a cup of wine costs at the cookshop counter, less than a meal and more than a cup of water. The barber on this lane charges the corner rate, which is above the alley rate and below the rate in the streets that front the forum, and that position in the scale is the whole of his dignity. The corner is the corner. The stone on the near end of the board has a flat face, and on that flat face somebody has scratched a shape that is not a letter or a word. She notices it because the light from her lamp finds the scratch at an angle and makes it stand. She does not know who scratched it or when. She knows that the stone will be on that board tomorrow morning and the scratch will be face up and nobody will be looking at it. She goes past the bench and the chair and the lamp on its unlit bracket. The lane beyond them is empty and familiar, and runs straight to the junction of her own quarter, and the sound of it is already hers. It comes off the walls at the pitch she knows, which is the pitch of a narrower lane with slightly lower buildings, and the air in it is the air she began in. Warmer than the wide road. Darker than the descent. This is the part of the city that has her dimensions. The water at the corner goes over the worn place in the lip and lands and spreads and runs off downhill, and it does that while she is asleep, and it does it at the same 3 pitches it made all night. Nothing turns it off. The stone around the plinth stays dark. A dipper knocks the side of a tub somewhere below and is set down, and the sound of it is smaller than the water and does not last as long. The lane fills with light instead of freight. The carts have gone out through the gates, and the drays are standing on the far side of the walls with their axles greased, and the wheels will not sound again on the crown of that road until the light goes. In their place there are feet and voices at the height of a doorway, and a shutter and another shutter, and a broom on stone in a slow, even, unhurried rhythm. Up in the room, the grey at the window moves across the floorboards a hand's width at a time and does not reach the corner. The straw holds its shape. The pad hangs on its hook and dries from the outside in, stiffening as it goes. Her breathing settles into the long, slow measure it keeps until the middle of the afternoon, and her shoulder, unloaded, lets go of the last of it, joint by joint, without waking her. Warm air moves along the floor at the level of the boards. The smell of the vat comes up through the window and thins. Below that, the smell of bread. Below that, nothing in particular. A cart on another street, far off, and then not. Somebody counting. Low, in tens. The wall beside the bed holds the night's cold longer than the air does and gives it up slowly, and it is going and it goes. The key on the cord does not move. The jar in its ring in the corner does not move. The hook on the wall holds the pad, and the pad holds its shape, and the shape is the shape of a shoulder that is not under it anymore. These are the objects of her room, and they are at rest, and the room around them has stopped asking anything of them, and they are what they have always been, which is objects in a room. Down in the lane, a woman calls a name twice and gets an answer on the third call. Somewhere in the building, a shutter is thrown fully open and knocks the wall. The man at the vat below is doing what he does in the morning, and the sound of it is a slow, regular sound that does not change and does not stop and does not need attending to. The city is running on its own now. She does not need to be in it. The straw holds the warmth of the 3 people who were in it all night. The child is gone, and the other woman is gone, and the warmth is going with them and will be gone within an hour, and the cold will come back in from the floor and the wall, and the straw will be cold by mid-morning, and she will be asleep inside that cold and will not notice it. The body in sleep is its own warmth. The light on the floor keeps moving. It does not hurry. It is the same light that is on the lane below, and on the cistern house on the slope, and on the top of the cattle ground fence, and on the surface of the river, which is where it is going when it leaves this room. By the time it reaches the river, it will be full day. By then, she will have been asleep for 2 hours and will have 3 more ahead of her. The sound of the city reduces to its slowest parts. The water, the pigeons under the eaves, who have been there all night without declaring themselves. A child somewhere below at the start of a day that has nothing tired in it yet. The creak of the stair, which is the building taking a different position in the warmth. Then longer gaps. Then the sound of the water alone, which is the oldest sound in the city and the one that does not require a city to make it. Your breath slows now too. The jar is in the corner. The key is on the hook. The lamp is cold. The window is a grey square, and the grey is lightening at a rate too slow to watch and too steady to stop. Let the city have the morning. It knows what to do with it. The water, the stone, The warmth of the straw and the nothing required. Slower now. The water, the light moving across the floor a hand's width at a time and arriving nowhere you need to follow. Wood settles. Straw settles. Cool at the shoulder. Warm at the back. Then the long, low sound of water going down into stone, steady, unhurried, without end. It is under everything. It does not stop. And neither do you. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the